Chapter 840. Gu Qianchuan sat opposite Gu Xingyun. In the past 2 years he had lost a lot of weight. His hair had turned white, and one of his sleeves was fluttering in the wind. He looked old and miserable. Gu Xingyun's days of recuperation might not be miserable, but they were definitely not easy. Even though he was also an expert of the invincible realm, as Gu Xingyun fell silent, Gu Qianchuan still faced unimaginable pressure. Li Shi was gone in Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun slept most of the time. Under the endless pressure, Gu Qianchuan already had the idea that he might not be able to support Kunlun City. His ambition gradually converged, so his relationship with Gu Xingyun became much more harmonious. Hearing Gu Xingyun's words, Gu Qianchuan looked up at him and smiled strangely. I can choose? What can I choose? Do nothing but wait for death? Gu Xingyun lowered his head and rubbed the teacup in his hand. After a while, he shook his head and said, Things are not that bad. That can only be said that you underestimated the thoughts of Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing. Gu Qianchuan said unceremoniously. The relationship between them became stable again, and their words were no longer polite to each other. He grabbed a cigarette with his only arm, flicked his fingers, lit the cigarette and said, How is your injury? It's not difficult to recover, but it will take time. Gu Xingyun said quietly. How long? To what extent can it be recovered? Gu Qianchuan stared at Gu Xingyun's eyes seriously. Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took a sip of tea and narrowed his eyes slightly. No one knew how much he had gained during this period of recuperation. Even he did not know. Before he was injured, he was only close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now the only thing that Gu Xingyun could be sure of was that if he recovered from his injury, he could at least set foot in the domain of the peak of the invincible realm. As for how far he could go, he did not know. But at least, he frowned and smiled. Far better than before. What about time? Gu Qianchuan asked lightly. Gu Xingyun subconsciously touched the position of his heart, and a gloomy look flashed in his eyes. He was lucky not to die when he was not at the peak of the invincible realm and suffered the full blow of the murderous weapon-setting sun at a close distance. Even after nearly 2 years, his injury still needed time to recover slowly. He thought of Situ Tsangyue. At that time in Lin En, the woman almost completely aimed the setting sun at his chest and fired. Sooner or later, he would make her pay a painful price. It's not important. Gu Xingyun said lightly, I do need some time, but so does Li Tianlan. He can't be faster than me. Even Li Tianlan a year ago. With the 13th floor he wouldn't be much weaker than you at your peak. Gu Qianchuan shook his head and mocked. If not, how could Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing have the idea of letting him replace Kunlun City? The muscles on Gu Xingyun's face twitched fiercely, but he didn't speak. Let Emperor Dong's palace replace Kunlun City and let Li Tianlan become the new god of war of Zhongzhou State. This was the real idea of Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing. If Li Tianlan refused to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai, this idea might have become a reality that was being implemented now. This idea was hidden. But the Special Warfare Group was one of the 6 groups anyway. As the leaders of the Special Warfare Group, how could Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun not hear any news? Up to now, Kunlun City's complaints about the president and the prime minister aside, at least they and Li Tianlan had really formed a relationship that could not coexist. Kunlun City could not allow a person who could replace itself at any time to appear. With the development of Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace, it was impossible to let go of Kunlun City, a huge obstacle. Coupled with the grudges of the past, both sides had become enemies that would not rest until one of them was dead. So when Qin Fangqing wanted to block the desert prison, the first place he thought of was Kunlun City. At his current age, this is his limit. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold. In a short time he can't even break through the real invincible realm, let alone the peak of the invincible realm. His physical quality in his early 20s can't bear the power of the peak of the invincible realm. At his age, it's a little difficult for him to practice the thunder-shocking scripture. Li Tianlan himself must be very clear about this. His physical quality is far from the peak state. It's a pipe dream for him to enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. His words were very confident. This was not only the confidence that Li Tianlan could not enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. Similarly, he was sure that his injury could be completely recovered in 3 to 5 years. So you have a choice. There's no need to fight with your life now. You're not waiting for death. You're now the acting governor of Kunlun City, so you can completely refuse Qin Fangqing's request. If you really want to deal with the situation, just send a few people to the desert to guard. Gu Xingyun said slowly. Seeing Wang Xingxiao's strength at the risk of fighting and Li Tianlan's domineering way of killing people at will, Gu Xingyun's thinking was slowly changing with the increasingly arrogant style of the younger generation. When he recovered from his injury, he would be at the peak of the invincible realm, just as Li Tianlan once boasted. On that day, Kunlun City was the overall situation of Jianghu State. At that time, he would be the first to find Li Tianlan and kill Li Tianlan at all costs and in spite of all obstacles. At worst, he would go to the desert prison for a few years. When he came out, Kunlun City would still be Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan's face was cold. There was a flash of hesitation in his eyes. Then he shook his head and said in a low voice, "I'm not as generous as you. I've been like this since I was a child. I only know that we're helping the parliament now. It's the general trend. We have the advantage. If we don't seize this opportunity, we're rejecting the parliament. If you can't suppress Li Tianlan in the future, the parliament won't help us." Gu Xingyun looked at Gu Qianchuan silently. There was an emotion of understanding in his eyes. "So, you've made up your mind? Is the news of Silver Phoenix reliable?" Gu Qianchuan asked. "Of course." Gu Qianchuan nodded. "She's an elite of Phoenix Pavilion. It won't be a problem for her to control Huang Tong. To be honest, with Silver Phoenix's condition, if Huang Tong hadn't been in Beijiang, he wouldn't have gotten Silver Phoenix at all. But now it's different. If the action of blocking the desert is successful, Huang Tong will at least be a member of parliament in the future. In this way we won't treat Silver Phoenix badly. In that case, I'll guard the desert with the 13th Army." Gu Qianchuan touched his empty sleeves and thought of the young man who cut off his arm. A haze flashed through his eyes. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. It was a win-win situation for the parliament and Kunlun City to block Li Tianlan with the power of Jianghu State. Moreover, he was not at ease with Gu Xingyun. No one could be sure that Gu Xingyun could really suppress Li Tianlan in the future. It would be best if he could kill Li Tianlan with the help of this incident. It was not impossible, because this was a war. Take a few more people there. Gu Xingyun glanced at him and said quietly, "If you meet Li Tianlan, be careful. Be careful means retreat if you can. Now you should not be his opponent." Gu Qianchuan sneered. "That was me 2 years ago. You can make progress. Even if I lose an arm, I can't stay in the same place all the time." Gu Xingyun nodded, picked up the teacup and said, "Have a nice trip." Gu Qianchuan did not speak. His figure moved and disappeared in front of Gu Xingyun in an instant. Gu Xingyun sat alone in his yard, holding a teacup and watching the wind and snow dancing in the sky. The darkness gradually began to dissipate. Gu Xingyun finished the tea in the cup and put it down. A slight and light footstep appeared in his perception and gradually approached his yard. Gu Xingyun was stunned. A warm smile vaguely appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he sat back again. No one knocked on the door. The gate of the yard was gently pushed open from the outside. A girl in a long skirt came in. There seemed to be a fog in the yard. It was as light as sand. It was a kind of hazy and ethereal aura. Ethereal, smart, dreamy, and cold. The whole yard seemed to be in a trance with the appearance of the girl. Some people's bodies seemed to truly have immortal energy. At a glance, it was as if they didn't belong to the mortal world, not eating the food of the mortal world. She wasn't arrogant, she was calm and quiet, but it was as if she was always standing outside the mortal world, cold, quiet, and perfect. Gu Xingyun quietly looked at the perfect girl who was like a fairy. His eyes were full of love, like a father seeing his own daughter. "Teacher." The girl came to Gu Xingyun and bowed slightly. "Silly girl, how many times have I said that when there is no one around, you can call me foster father. You can call me father directly." Gu Xingyun reached out and touched the girl's head. He said softly, "Why do you get up so early today?" "I'm meditating." The girl did not avoid Gu Xingyun's hand, but she was not close to him. Of course she was not alienated either. It seemed that she was born to be cold. She looked only 14 or 15 years old, but her every move was with an indescribable calmness. "If there is anything you don't understand, tell me." Gu Xingyun laughed and his eyes became softer. Without Li Shi in Kunlun City, he seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally let go of Li Qingqing. Instead, he was particularly fond of this girl who had just come to the mountain for less than 2 years. He taught her the martial arts of Kunlun City without reservation. Compared with Li Qingqing, the girl enjoyed the real princess treatment in Kunlun City. "It's okay," the girl said quietly. She looked at Gu Xingyun with her ethereal and dreamy eyes and said softly, "Teacher, why did Second Master suddenly go out of the city?" "Second Master has something to deal with. I'm injured, so I can only trouble him." The girl said yes. Looking at the falling snow in front of her, she was lost in thought. Her eyes were clear, but there was a yearning in the depths of her eyes. Gu Xingyun's heart moved slightly and he smiled softly. Xianyan, do you also want to go out of the city and have a look? The darkness was about to dissipate. In the morning light with falling snow, the girl named Gu Xianyan lowered her head and said softly, I don't know. After you go out of the city, where do you want to go and what do you want to do? Gu Xingyun continued to ask. Gu Xianyan still shook her head and said softly, I don't know. Well? Gu Xingyun pondered and smiled. Not knowing is a good thing but also not a good thing. Since you don't know, you might as well go out and have a look. Maybe you will know what you want to do. He flicked the girl's white forehead and smiled. After dawn I will arrange someone to send you out. No one will stop you if you want to do anything. But you can't get tired of the people who protect you. You are the princess of Kunlun City. It's not proper to have no one following you. Do you understand? A little joy flashed on the girl's delicate face and she nodded hard. She looked at the gloomy sky above Kunlun City and whispered, Teacher, it's dawn. Gu Xingyun looked at her expression and could not help laughing. He touched the teacup and whispered, Yes, it's dawn. When it was dawn, Gu Qianchuan officially left Kunlun City. In the courtyard of Beijiang Military Region, Ouyang Pengfei left Huang Tong's office. The 43rd Army near the desert began to assemble quickly. This morning in Kunlun City, which seemed to have been forgotten by many people, Gu Xingyun took Gu Xinyan's small hand and told her many times. He supported his unhealed body and sent her out of Kunlun City step by step. Chapter 841. The morning sun rose in the desert. The night passed completely. The 43rd Corps of Jianghu State directly took a shortcut into the desert when the sky just lit up. The 43rd Corps was not as famous as the Border Control Corps, but no matter how strong the Border Control Corps was, it was impossible to suppress the edge of all the other armies in Jianghu State. Jianghu State had millions of soldiers. Even if the 600,000 soldiers were not included in the Corps, it was still not difficult to find some battle-worthy troops. The 43rd Corps was a rapid response force stationed in Beijiang all year round. Many times the problems it dealt with were equally sensitive. Even in the entire Jianghu State, the 43rd Corps could be said to be one of the elite armies with the most combat effectiveness. Whether in terms of personnel quality or military equipment, it could be regarded as a real ace. The most important thing was that the 43rd Corps was probably the most experienced army in the entire Jianghu State when it came to fighting in the desert environment. The 43rd Corps was the primary candidate to block the desert prison. The helicopter hovered over the desert. A large number of armored vehicles and main battle tanks advanced in a straight line in the desert. The military transport vehicles that had been specially modified to adapt to the desert environment moved majestically. The sun shone on the vast expanse of yellow sand. The army of nearly 20,000 people advanced continuously, bringing with them an indomitable aura of iron and blood. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at this scene and suddenly felt that it was a little tragic. Huang Tong had decided to completely execute the Prime Minister's order and block the desert prison at all costs. So his 43rd Corps was just a vanguard. Within 8 hours, at least 2 heavy armored corps suitable for desert combat would form a second blockade along the road of the 43rd Corps. This time, Huang Tong almost mobilized more than half of the strength of the Beijiang military region. In order to block the area within 100 miles around the prison, the Beijiang military region dispatched at least 100,000 people. The mobilization of 100,000 people, just thinking about the huge logistics transportation was enough to let people know Huang Tong's determination. At the same time, it could also be seen that they were serious and afraid of this battle. There was nothing to fear in the desert prison. But no one dared to ignore Li Tianlan. Similarly, no one could ignore the giant group around Li Tianlan. If this was a war, the blood would be shed in the desert. But at this moment, the top management of Jianghu State, the Academy, the Southeast, the Crown Prince, and the 4 groups of wealthy families were also fighting. Li Tianlan was already in the teeth of the storm. Ouyang Pengfei, on the other hand, was pushed to this position. He was the vanguard in this war. If he won, he would naturally work hard and make great contributions. But what if he failed? He would probably be smashed to pieces. It couldn't quell the anger of Li Tianlan and the giant group. Ouyang Pengfei shuddered. In fact, he had never met Li Tianlan, at least not face to face. However, he had a good personal relationship with Qi Mulan. Every time he thought of Li Tianlan, he would think of the miserable end of the Qi family. And the person who had caused the tragedy of the Qi family had unconsciously become a shadow in his heart. He really didn't want to provoke Li Tianlan, but standing in this position he had no choice. No, perhaps there was still a choice. His only choice was to go all out and lock down the desert prison. Only success was allowed, failure was not allowed. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at the military map in the cabin. On the map was the terrain of the desert with a radius of 100 miles. It was a stretch of yellow sand that was extremely flat. It was so simple and boring that it looked like a forbidden land. However, at this time, this land of danger was divided into countless pieces, marked with different colors on the map and marked with numbers. Although this map, which had been hastily made, was crude, it was extremely effective in this kind of simple terrain. At present, our goal is the 4th zone. It's about 70 miles away from the desert prison, which is the most suitable blockade area. If we want to further narrow down the blockade area, we can advance about 3 kilometers in the 4th zone, which is the limit. Beside Ouyang Pengfei, the chief of staff of the 43rd Army stared at the map in front of him and said slowly, "How many kilometers can we advance without considering the third eye and the heavenly arrow?" Ouyang Pengfei looked at the map in front of him and said calmly, "General, we have no choice but to consider the third eye and the heavenly arrow. Even if Li Tianlan dares to attack us, he may not dare to use the Sky Arrow base. But the Eye of the Sky is a fully automatic military base with a killing range of 60 miles. Once the Eye of the Sky is fully opened, no one who enters this area can survive. Don't doubt Li Tianlan's courage. Although I haven't met him, many people say that he is a madman. Once we enter the killing range of the Eye of the Sky, it's impossible for him to not attack. In a fully automatic military base, he can easily explain that there is a code error or some other reason. No matter how ridiculous it is, as long as he says it, people will be willing to believe it." The chief of staff shook his head and said, "I know what you mean, but Jianghu State has frozen most of the commands of the Third Eye in advance. Li Tianlan can't use the Third Eye system." Ouyang Pengfei said, "If it can be frozen, it can be turned on." The chief of staff hesitated and said in a low voice, "General, don't forget who the current standing minister of the army headquarters is. His authority is enough for him to turn on all the frozen weapon systems. Similarly, he has enough strength to do this. The Dongqing clan is the richest family in the Jianghu State military. Who knows how many chess pieces they have in the military? Well, even if Dongqing Wudi doesn't do it, what kind of place is the desert prison? The most dangerous criminals are imprisoned there. No one can be sure whether there are cutting-edge super hackers there. If Jianghu State can freeze the system, maybe the desert prison can be unlocked. To say the least, if Dongqing Wudi restarts the system, it will be explained to the public that it's the dying struggle of the prisoners in the prison. Li Tianlan killed them and handed them over. This is an explanation, but our brothers who sacrificed themselves died in vain." Ouyang Pengfei gritted his teeth and said nothing. "We have to confirm one thing. Jianghu State has no intention to kill Li Tianlan, even the parliament. It's not a matter of whether they want to kill him or not, but whether they can kill him or not. Taking action against Beihai is always the most important thing. But neither the president nor the prime minister can be crazy enough to start a war with the Southeast Group and the Prince Group at the same time. So the blockade this time is just to limit Li Tianlan. At least I haven't received an order to limit the supplies of the desert prison so far." The chief of staff said softly, "So if I'm right, the parliament will make a big move against Beihai in the near future. It won't take too long, so we won't blockade the desert for too long. When the matter in Beihai is over, the parliament will have a talk with Li Tianlan, and he hesitated and didn't speak for a while. "Go on." Ouyang Pengfei said quietly. "We might as well wait and see." The chief of staff said calmly. "Wait and see?" Ouyang Pengfei smiled bitterly. "We are at the forefront of this conflict. How can we wait and see? We are indeed very far ahead at present, but it's not a bad thing. At least if someone wants to rush in from the outside, they will first face the troops behind us. As for the direction of the desert prison, I don't know what happened to make the prime minister give such an order, but Li Tianlan won't know it at night. For a while he shouldn't respond too violently. Even if he does take action, there are still people in front of us who can shelter us." The chief of staff smiled and said softly, "His Highness Gu Qianchuan should be coming, right?" Chapter 842. About the fairy face in Kunlun City? Wasn't it written in Volume 4, Chapter 41, Xian Xuanzi took it from Mormons. The 43rd Army was moving. The Beihai Corps was also moving. From beginning to end, the desert prison remained silent. Beihai Province also remained silent. Hence, when news of the movements of the North Sea Legion and the 43rd Division reached the central continent, the first people to panic weren't the people in the desert prison or the North Sea Province. Instead, the first people to panic were the leaders in the central continent's upper echelons. This year, tomorrow was destined to be the most sensitive time. It happened once every 10 years like reincarnation. These leaders had long been used to such changes, but as the situation developed, some conflicts became more and more intense. Until the 43rd Army began to blockade the desert prison, some immovable big shots in the upper echelons of Jianghu state were shocked to find that the whole situation had developed to the point of life and death. The end of this term was the beginning of the next term. The transfer of power from the old to the new was related to the fate of Beihai province and the future of Emperor Dong's palace. It was no exaggeration to say that the change of power, Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace had been closely linked because it involved the southeast, the Crown Prince, the Academy and the Giant Group. Among the 6 groups in Jianghu state, the 4 strongest groups were involved and became the 2 sides of the game. The Beihai Group and the Special Warfare Group also had their own space to move. All the people in Jianghu state who were qualified to participate in this matter had already participated. Everyone had different pursuits, but the results they hoped for were the same. Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing might be thinking about the future of Jianghu state, but more people were thinking about the possible benefits in the future. The game of Beihai was the key before the change of power. If Beihai won, the Academy and the Prince Group would naturally lose a lot of strength. If Beihai lost, in the next 10 years, their power would shrink again until they completely disappeared in Jianghu state. Many people were silently participating and silently observing. Observing the aggressiveness of the Prince Group and the academics. Observing the compromise and retreat of the Southeast Group and the Prince Group quietly. Almost everyone who didn't know the inside story thought that the situation had formed a delicate balance. But the balance was completely broken overnight. The Beihai Corps searched the entire province. The 43rd Army directly blockaded the desert prison. If it was a game before, then, right now, such a direct and forceful style was almost equivalent to a war. The War of Jianghu state. In the hundreds of years since the founding of the country, there had been countless changes of power in Jianghu state, but there had never been a war. What about this time? As the actions of Jianghu state and Beihai became more and more intense, the entire Jianghu state began to get nervous. In the office of the executive minister of the army headquarters building, Dong Qingwudi smoked silently, squinting at a report from the Beijiang military region in his hand. The report was very short and the content was even simpler. It said that the 43rd Division had joined forces with 2 other heavy armored divisions to conduct a large-scale exercise. Dong Qingwudi did not look at this kind of serious nonsense. He mainly looked at a signature below. It was Li Huaqing's personal signature. The president of Jianghu state had always been the minister of the army headquarters, but most of the time it was just a nominal title. The executive minister presided over the daily work of the army headquarters. Reports like the one in the northern borderline were usually transmitted to the executive minister first, and then continued to be reported. But this time it was the complete opposite. Without Dong Qingwudi's knowledge, the report from Beijiang had fallen into Li Huaqing's hands. After Li Huaqing signed it, the report came to the army headquarters. In other words, Li Huaqing agreed to this maneuver. Under such circumstances, Dong Qingwudi's opinion was no longer important. When the president had clearly expressed his opinion, even if he had a different opinion he could not say it, otherwise he would be immature. Therefore, he frowned slightly and raised the document in his hand several times, but finally put it on the table helplessly. This document is a little interesting. Yi Dongxing picked up the document, glanced at it and said with a smile. Dong Qingwudi glanced at him, shook his head and said nothing. At present, the president's attitude seems to be a little vague. Yi Dongxing looked down at the signature on the document and suddenly said, in the general direction his position will not change, but the prime minister is a little irrational now. He can even be said to be crazy. Naturally, the president will not accompany him to the end. Dong Qingwudi said blandly. Although Li Huaqing still signed his name on the document, the news that the president and the prime minister appeared in Dragon Lake Park at the same time last night also came out. All kinds of signs showed that the cooperation between the president and the prime minister had cracked. But no matter what, at this time, Li Huaqing would still support Qin Fangqing. The situation is in our favor, Yi Dongxing said with certainty. Dong Qingwudi snorted softly and said with some dissatisfaction, we still need some evidence. We just arrested him last night. Even if we interrogate him it will take some time. Yi Dongxing spread his hands helplessly. But don't worry, we will get what we should get soon. When the evidence is put in front of the president, what do you think his attitude will be? Li Huaqing knew that Qin Fangqing had started the termination plan. The Wang family of Beihai also knew. But now there was no evidence that could directly prove that the termination plan was Qin Fangqing's doing. Sometimes evidence was important and sometimes it was not at all. When the strength of the two sides was almost equal, as long as they found the evidence that Qin Fangqing started the termination plan, with the power of the Wang family of Beihai and Dongqing Wudi, it was enough to give Qin Fangqing a heavy blow, and even push Li Huaqing away from Qin Fangqing completely. Now the elites of Zhongzhou state under the control of Mount Dibing were the key to providing evidence. Tunlan, Dongqing Wudi was silent for a moment and said softly, "He has been in the desert prison for too long. Even if you have the so-called evidence, the president's attitude on the blockade of the prison will not change. He and Qin Fangqing are estranged just because Qin Fangqing's means are too fierce, which is not in line with his principles of life. He doesn't want to take risks with Qin Fangqing. This doesn't mean that the president doesn't want to take over Beihai. The evidence you have may bring a lot of pressure to Qin Fangqing, but the president and the prime minister will not let go of the blockade of the prison. They both want to take over Beihai and don't want to see Tianlan cooperate with Beihai. So in any case they will not let anyone send the news to the prison. It doesn't matter." Yi Dongxing smiled. "Comparatively speaking, what matters is His Highness's current identity. His Highness went to the desert prison mainly because of Qi Mulin's case. As long as Qi Mulin is proven guilty of treason, His Highness is innocent." "So what?" Dongqing Wudi said with some mockery. "If he is proven innocent, will Tianlan be released directly at this time? If that's the case, what's the point of blockading the desert prison? I mean, as long as His Highness is proven innocent, His Highness can do a lot of things. We will break through the blockade as soon as possible and reveal the termination plan to His Highness. The whole Beihai province is looking forward to the day when His Highness breaks through the blockade." Chapter 843. The prisoners in the desert prison were still calm. Without any information channels, they had no way of knowing what was happening in the outside world. However, the higher-ups of the prison were on high alert. The conference room that was used by Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing as a negotiation venue was filled with people. Xiao Mahai, a few deputy wardens, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, the chief of staff, a few middle-level managers of the prison were gathered together. Although there was no panic, the atmosphere in the conference room was extremely heavy. Everyone. In the heavy atmosphere, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, Kong Zhe, slowly said, 5 hours ago the Parliament unilaterally shut down all the control systems of Sky Eye Base. At the same time, they shut down the radar and positioning system of Sky Arrow Air Force Base. Most of the military equipment in the two bases are paralyzed. In this situation, if there is a serious criminal escaping, the Sky Eye Base will not be able to lock onto any target. Without the radar and positioning system, it will be difficult for Sky Arrow Air Force Base to send air forces to fight. We don't have a clear route. In the entire base, only a few top pilots can continue to operate the fighter jets. However, they can only take off and land. We can't even lock onto the target. The Parliament hasn't given any orders to the base. It's only unilateral, but it has completely paralyzed our combat power. From now on, the two military bases near the desert prison have zero combat power. We need everyone to protect the safety of the prison from now on. 4 hours ago, our logistics personnel were detained in the northern military region. Although some daily supplies were sent over, they were all sent over by the elites of the 43rd Division. As for our people, we've lost contact with them. The head of logistics had a gloomy expression. Although the prison still has power, all external communication signals have been completely blocked. We can't get in touch with the outside world. Phones, internet, everything is in a state of disrepair. 2 of the prison staff were supposed to take a leave to visit their families. However, before they could leave the prison, they were sent back at gunpoint by the people of the 43rd Division. A deputy warden slammed the table and gritted his teeth. What are the people of the 43rd Division trying to do? They said that they were conducting a military exercise, so they temporarily blocked all access to the prison. Major General Kong Zhe sneered. His eyes were full of mockery. Then what's the point of blocking communication signals? The short-tempered deputy warden snorted coldly. They only blocked all our exit and entry routes. As for the signal jamming, they said it had nothing to do with them. Kong Zhe shook his head and couldn't help but look at Xiao Mahai, who was sitting in the main seat. Warden, what should we do now? Wait. Xiao Mahai said lightly. Everyone looked at each other. The current situation was obviously very abnormal. Wait. How long do I have to wait? There's no need to think about it. These things are all directed at us. To be precise, they are directed at His Highness. This is a blockade. No matter what the other party says, This matter is actually a blockade of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai said slowly. When Li Tianlan was not around, he was no longer the servile servant. He looked calm and composed. He glanced at the middle-level officer in charge of logistics, narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Are the test results out?" "It's out. All the supplies sent by the 43rd Division are in line with our purchase list. They've all been tested. Normal, no poison." The logistics supervisor nodded. Xiao Mahai nodded. "What about the ingredients for His Highness?" "All tested. Normal, no poison." The eyes of the logistics supervisor were calm and relaxed. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and suddenly said with a self-deprecating smile, "At present, it seems that the Parliament obviously doesn't intend to poison or starve us. Our supplies are not cut off, no poison, but we can't have any form of contact with the outside world. That is to say, the Parliament just wants us to stay here quietly." No one spoke. Everyone was looking at Xiao Mahai. There are two possibilities. First, the Parliament doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison, or doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison now. But this blockade won't last long. The cost of using tens of thousands of troops to blockade a place is too high. Using this means shows the Parliament's determination and attitude that they don't want a long-term blockade. Second, the Parliament doesn't want His Highness to know something happened in the outside world. I don't know what it is, but it should be very important to His Highness. Similarly, tens of thousands of troops can't blockade here for a long time. So this matter is only important to His Highness now. Or they think that after a period of time, even if His Highness knows about it, it won't affect them. We don't have to think too highly of ourselves. If His Highness isn't here, the Parliament won't target the desert prison with such great fanfare. Everyone's face was still solemn. Xiao Mahai was the warden here. It was such a tough job. Before Xiao Mahai came here, he was the commander of a group army in Jianghu state. After he came here, those who were sent here were naturally his trusted subordinates. For example, Air Force Base Commander Kong Zhe used to be the chief of staff of Xiao Mahai's group army. Other deputy wardens and middle-level cadres were also Xiao Mahai's trusted subordinates. Xiao Mahai had long been labeled as a member of the giant group. Could be said that he was the person closest to Li Tianlan. Now such a thing suddenly happened in the outside world. This showed that the situation outside had reached the most sensitive time. No one knew what was being blocked this time. But if the blockade was successful, Li Tianlan was destined to stay in the desert prison for the rest of his life, and they would not have a good end either. If the blockade failed, Xiao Mahai would have a meteoric rise, and all of them would also have a very good future. Everyone was nervous and a little excited. "Commander, give the order." Kong Zhe suddenly stood up, looked at Xiao Mahai and said in a deep voice. At this moment he subconsciously used the title he used in the group army. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and laughed. "I don't know what they are blocking or they don't want His Highness to leave. But I'm sure that if this is a war and the 43rd Army is the enemy, the more they don't want us to do something, the more we have to try to do it. If they want to block His Highness, we will make a way for him. We will open a path for His Highness. If they want to suppress the news, we must know what they are suppressing." Xiao Mahai stood up and said calmly, "I'm going to try the strength of the blockade of the 43rd Army." Everyone stood up all of a sudden. Was Xiao Mahai going to break out of the blockade alone and see outside? "Commander." A deputy warden was silent for a while and said carefully, "Although we can't see His Highness now, should we tell Madam about this?" Xiao Mahai looked down at his watch and shook his head. "Madam is still resting." No. The door of the conference room. It was suddenly pushed open. Xiao Qing, who was like a beautiful scenery in the prison, trotted in and shouted, "Dad, Madam wants you to go to her now." Xiao Mahai's body stopped, and then he turned and walked out of the conference room without hesitation. Everyone in the conference room looked at each other and finally sat down. Xiao Mahai came to Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai's dormitory as fast as he could. After getting up, Qin Weibai, who was neatly dressed, had already had breakfast. She was sitting in a chair and flipping through a thick notebook in her hand. "Madam." Xiao Mahai's voice was respectful, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What happened?" Qin Weibai glanced at him and said quietly, "The internet suddenly can't be used." "Not only the internet." Xiao Mahai smiled bitterly. "All the communication equipment can't be used. The 43rd Army blocked all the passages to and from the prison at the same time. At present, the desert prison has been completely isolated. We can't contact the outside world and the outside world can't contact us either." Qin Weibai's hand that was flipping through the notebook suddenly stopped, and she was silent for a long time. "Something happened to Yuatong." After a long time she said slowly, Either the Wang family of Beihai knows about Yuetong, or, she shook her head slightly and said in a slightly heavier voice, what a fool. Xiao Mahai thought that Qin Weibai was scolding him, so he bent down subconsciously and whispered, yes, yes, madam, I'm going to. What are you going to do? Qin Weibai glanced at him. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the person who plans to deal with Yuetong. What a fool. Xiao Mahai thought of the negotiation between Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao some time ago, and vaguely seemed to understand something. If the blockade of the desert prison was to prevent His Highness from cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai, then who personally ordered the blockade of the prison? The president? Or the prime minister? Xiao Mahai was a little nervous, but then he became determined. What are you thinking about? Qin Weibai asked calmly. Madam, their blockade is too hasty. We don't know what's going on outside, and we don't know the specific reason why they suddenly blockade the prison. This is too passive. I think we should take advantage of the time when their blockade is not strict to break out. At least we can get some information. Xiao Mahai whispered, I want to go and have a look. Qin Weibai raised her head, looked at Xiao Mahai seriously and asked, do you know the consequences of doing this? Xiao Mahai was stunned and said blankly, I haven't thought about it. Once you fail to break out, you will be 100% accused of treason, and then you may not come back. Qin Weibai said lightly. Xiao Mahai was silent for a long time and then said sullenly, at least it's better than doing nothing. Qin Weibai lowered her head, looked at the notebook in her hand and said softly, it's okay. Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Qin Weibai did not speak either. Her eyes were fixed on the page of the notebook on the last paragraph of the page. In October of the same year, Jiang Qiansong and his brothers died in South Africa, and the legend of Qin disappeared. In February of the next year, the East Emperor's guards came out and killed 3 invincible realm experts, shocking the world. The guards stood in front of the East Emperor Palace for 2 years, accompanied them day and night and finally died in Beihai. The first and only guard of the East Emperor Palace. His code name is Ruthless. Chapter 844. Xiao Mahai waited for a long time. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. The prison seemed to be facing a formidable enemy, and the whole Zhongzhou state was nervous. It seemed to end with her words. Xiao Mahai thought about it many times, but he couldn't figure out what it meant. Did it mean that nothing would happen to the prison? Or that nothing would happen to the outside world? Or was it something else? Xiao Mahai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He was actually a little afraid of Qin Weibai, or not exactly afraid. But in front of her, he always had a kind of uneasiness that he couldn't describe. Qin Weibai was not an easy person to get along with. She and Li Tianlan both looked very quiet. But Li Tianlan was purely quiet. And Qin Weibai's silence had a kind of indescribable indifference and arrogance. No matter where she was, what she did and what posture she had a kind of unattainable calmness and coldness. This kind of sharpness that was enough to make most people shrink back might only be restrained when she was around Li Tianlan. When Xiao Mahai was alone with her, his posture was even more respectful than when he was with Li Tianlan. Do what you have to do. Qin Weibai turned a page of the notebook. She didn't look up but said quietly, okay. Xiao Mahai nodded and turned to leave. He didn't react until he was out of the door. What he had to do? Serving Li Tianlan was his biggest responsibility. But he hadn't seen Li Tianlan for nearly 2 months. Li Tianlan was now raising his sword. The area where he raised his sword had been completely regarded as a forbidden area of the prison. Qin Weibai personally sent his 3 meals every day. What else should he do? Xiao Mahai shook his head fiercely. His mind was a little confused. He walked back to the conference room in a daze, sat in his seat and didn't speak for a while. Everyone in the conference room was looking at him with concern. No one here knew Qin Weibai. But almost everyone had heard of the legend of this goddess. Compared to them, and even compared to Li Tianlan, she was the one who truly stood at the top. Whether it was before or now, everyone wanted to hear the goddess's opinion on the current situation. Corps Commander. Kang Zhe waited for a while and finally couldn't help but call out. Xiao Mahai's voice was a little erratic. What did Madam say? Kang Zhe was a little nervous. Madam? Xiao Mahai hesitated for a moment and smiled bitterly. Madam said it's fine. She asked me to do what I should do. Kang Zhe was stunned and asked subconsciously, then what do you want to do? Xiao Mahai's mind went silent for a moment. He immediately understood. Qin Weibai asked him to do what he should do. At a time like this, what he should do wasn't important. What was important was what he wanted to do. Before he went to see Qin Weibai, he decided to break through the blockade outside the prison by himself. That was what he should be doing right now. Xiao Mahai suddenly stood up. Kong Zhe was startled. She looked at him cautiously. "What's the situation outside?" Xiao Mahai asked in a deep voice. An hour ago, in addition to the 43rd Army, the Beijiang military region also used 2 heavy armored regiments. At present, more than half of the military strength has appeared near the prison, and the number has exceeded 40,000. In addition, Gu Qianchuan, the acting governor of Kunlun City, appeared in the station of the 43rd Army. It seems that the Beijiang military region intends to completely block us at all costs. According to their actions, it is estimated that in another 8 hours, the desert prison will become a real isolated island. At that time, even a fly can't fly out. Kong Zhe took a deep breath and said in a gloomy tone. All the communication within the prison had failed. The message could only be transmitted by the most primitive means. The station area of the 43rd Army was 60 miles away from the prison, which was the front line. The people they sent out must be close to the front line, then run back to report the news and then run back again, back and forth. The news, he said, was the latest situation that came an hour ago. Gu Qianchuan. 40,000 people, 8 hours? Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes tightly and muttered to himself. Corps Commander, I'll kill our way out with you. The deputy warden, who was in charge of interrogations, stood up and said resolutely, You're right. He had always been hot-tempered. Seeing that Xiao Mahai wanted to break out, he didn't bother to consider any consequences and directly showed his attitude. Nonsense. Kong Zhe glared at him. At this time there is no possibility of success to break out. Tens of thousands of people gathered in such a small place in the desert. There are countless detection instruments, a large number of advanced military equipment, and experts of the invincible realm. It's impossible to break out. We have to do it even if it's impossible, Xiao Mahai said. Kong Zhe froze for a moment. This time the blockade is aimed at Your Highness and Emperor Dong's palace. It's not appropriate for Your Highness to show up for the time being. But it doesn't mean that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't need to show its attitude in the face of the army of Jianghu state. This kind of attitude can only be expressed by me. Xiao Mahai said calmly, I'm the director of Emperor Dong's palace. The army has sealed us. If I don't show up, should I let Madam take the risk? His Highness and his wife built the current Emperor Dong's palace together. We have all kinds of reputations in the outside world, but we never shrink back. We are cowards who bully the weak and fear the strong. We don't have such a reputation now, and we can't have it in the future. But Kong Zhe was a little annoyed. But it's Jianghu state that seals us. Jianghu state, Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan. No one would think that the three were not one. Toughness, madness, and overbearingness were all external. But Jianghu state was still one of them. Yes, it's Jianghu state that seals us, Xiao Mahai said meaningfully. Kong Zhe froze and took a deep look at Xiao Mahai. At this moment, no one could understand Xiao Mahai's meaning except for him. From this moment on, the most bitter lieutenant general in Jianghu state seemed to have completely unloaded all his identities in Jianghu state and completely stood in the position of the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Corps Commander, we can't be sure of His Highness's attitude. Kong Zhe became serious and said slowly, I can be sure. Xiao Mahai smiled and whispered, I remember when His Highness was in Eastern Europe 2 years ago, he once said something to Sword Emperor. Kong Zhe was a little confused. At that time, Li Tianlan was still the youngest marshal in Jianghu state. His every move and every word was the focus of attention. Many sensitive topics would also be recorded, but they could only be viewed with certain authority. After all, Xiao Mahai was a lieutenant general, and he had enough authority. The words and deeds of some people that needed his authority to see were often sensitive. Maybe many years later, a certain person or a certain sentence would appear in the history of Jianghu state. What is it? Kong Zhe asked. Xiao Mahai took a deep breath. A tiny but incomparably sharp electric arc curled around his body, faintly discernible. He had not fought with others for many years, but he was forcibly recovering. His body was straight, and his fighting intent was rising little by little. In the subtle light of the arc, he looked extremely determined. If Jianghu state doesn't let me down, I won't let Jianghu state down. Xiao Mahai said lightly, whether it's His Highness or Emperor Dong's palace, or even everyone, it should be the same. Li Tianlan said this in Eastern Europe, but until now no one had asked Li Tianlan what would happen if Jianghu state failed him. What was sacred, lofty, worthy of love, and worthy of everything in everyone's eyes would not be let down. So this question was meaningless. When that day came there were only choices. Just like Xiaomahai's choice now. It represented the choice of Emperor Dong's palace. Outside the prison, the morning sun rose high in the sky. Under the scorching sun, thousands of miles of yellow sand could be seen. An incomparably dazzling lightning rushed out of the gate of the desert prison and rushed to the front line 60 miles away. It moved forward with indomitable will. Chapter 845. Qin Weibai stood in front of the window, quietly watching the bolt of lightning that rushed out of the prison gate disappear from sight. Then countless people in the prison were busy. A few technicians went to the Sky Eye base trying to restart the weapon system there. This fully automatic weapon system was set up in the desert, so the firepower was extremely violent. Even an expert at the peak of the invincible realm couldn't survive such dense firepower. As long as they broke through the remote blockade of Jianghu state and reactivated the system, they at least had a bargaining chip with the 43rd Army. Kang Zhe returned to the Sky Eye base, planning to restore the combat effectiveness of the Air Force as much as possible in the most primitive way. The others were still in the conference room, discussing how to deal with the current situation. In any case, everyone in the prison was already on the same boat with Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan didn't come out for the time being, they had to do their best to try to solve the current problem. Qin Weibai turned back to the table and poured herself a glass of water. Her perfect and delicate face looked quiet and soft, without any tension or solemnity. The army was gathering dozens of miles away. The blockade had been fully spread out in the desert. But it was just a blockade. What Qin Fangqing wanted most was Beihai. At this time he couldn't kill Li Tianlan. He couldn't kill him and he didn't dare to. Killing Li Tianlan and destroying Beihai meant a full-scale war in Jianghu state. That was a real war. If Li Tianlan died in Qin Fangqing's hands, Dongqing Wudi would definitely have the courage, reason, and strength to launch a real war. Naturally, the Southeast Group would not sit still. At that time, the whole Jianghu state would be in war, with corpses everywhere and blood flowing like rivers. Jianghu state's international status would plummet. Even if Qin Fangqing was really crazy, he wouldn't take such a risk. So even if he knew that the giant group was cooperating with the Southeast Group, their main target was still the Southeast Group, so that Dongqing Wudi wouldn't be completely stimulated. Qin Fangqing didn't dare to hurt Li Tianlan. He knew that, and so did Qin Weibai. So now he could only completely block the desert prison and then concentrate on Beihai. In this way, the possibility of Qin Fangqing blocking the prison was easy to speculate. Either Qin Fangqing made up his mind to wipe out Beihai once and for all, or something happened in the outside world that would make Li Tianlan cooperate with Beihai. The former was unlikely because there was not enough time. The latter could only be because of Wang Yuetong. Qin Fangqing tried his best to prevent the news about Wang Yuetong from being passed to Beihai prison. That was why tens of thousands of soldiers had marched over, cut off communications and cut off the base's weapon systems. However, Qin Weibai still felt that Qin Fangqing was very stupid. From her position, she would not look up to the leader of a country. Qin Fangqing's actions this time were really stupid. Or rather, it could be said that his mentality was unbalanced and he didn't consider it thoroughly. He might not know many things. But at the very least, he should know that she was the clan leader of the Lin clan now, and they were locked in prison together. Could it be that the other party had really disregarded everything? Qin Weibai took a sip of water in silence and took the flower that Li Tianlan had given her from her hair. The flower formed by the sword qi was vivid and translucent, but it looked lifeless. More than a month ago, Li Tianlan's sword energy had completely died down. He cut off all contact with the outside world. Even though Qin Weibai sent him 3 meals a day, she always left them at the door. Not to mention seeing Li Tianlan, most of the time the food she sent to him was brought back untouched. No one knew how Li Tianlan was doing now. Li Tianlan's room was now like a black hole and no one dared to go in. Qin Weibai silently observed the flower in her hand. At the core of the flower, there was still a trace of sword intent that was so subtle that it almost didn't exist flowing, so it stabilized the shape of the flower. However, this trace of sword intent could not allow Qin Weibai to communicate with Li Tianlan at all. Even she did not know how Li Tianlan was raising the sword. She did not understand martial arts and she did not even know what raising the sword was. So she had been flipping through the notebook in her hand these days, trying to find some clues from it. Today she just turned to the page of ruthlessness. It happened to be when Xiaomahai came in to find her. The blue notebook was extremely heavy, and the content was detailed and cumbersome. It was not the experience of martial arts or weekly notes, but all her memories that were sleeping in Switzerland. The Samsara Palace's detailed and somewhat strange intelligence system was often built on the basis of these memories from the past or the future. Time could not change the affection, but the old memories would eventually fade. Therefore, she had recorded some important information in her notebook a long time ago. So the content of the notebook was varied. Some were like stories, some were like narratives, and some were like specific words which looked extremely messy. Qin Weibai's eyes fell on the sentence about ruthlessness. The guard stood in front of the East Emperor Palace for 2 years, accompanying him day and night. For 2 years he accompanied him day and night, standing in front of the palace. Qin Weibai looked at it for a long time. She thought about it, found a pen in the room, hesitated for a while, and finally finished the story. No one's memory was omniscient and omnipotent. She still had things she did not know. For example, Qin Weibai only knew things after she became the patriarch of the Lin clan. The East Emperor in the notebook was invincible and unparalleled in the world. In that era that belonged to him, no one was qualified to be his personal guard. So he only had one guard, codename Ruthless. Qin Weibai calmly wrote 3 lines of small words in the notebook. Beihai Wuyo. Xinyuan Wuyo. The East Emperor Ruthless. The story was complete. She put the notebook away, opened the door, and slowly walked out of the prison gate. The scorching sun shone in the desert, which seemed to reflect the light. The whole world was extremely bright. Qin Weibai, wearing a white casual shirt and white wide-legged pants, walked in the yellow sand. Her clothes fluttered and her fragrance filled the air, like a fairy descending to earth. Qin Weibai walked forward quietly. She walked in a straight line for about 10 miles. The sun was hot, and a fine layer of sweat appeared on her forehead. She raised her hand to wipe the sweat, and gently picked the sword energy flower Li Tianlan gave her. Her black hair fluttered with the white clothes. Qin Weibai squatted down, inserted the flower in her hand into the yellow sand under her feet, and whispered, "When will you come?" When noon was approaching, the helicopter from Yuzhou flew over Xinyuan City and finally landed slowly in front of the City Hall building of Xinyuan City. This was the youngest city in Tianan, but it had a completely different atmosphere from the other cities. There were flower beds, fountains, clean and tidy stone roads, and green grass. People were coming and going in front of the City Hall, but there was a faint sense of order. Overall, there was not the slightest bit of noise. Instead, it was somewhat quiet. Ning Qianqing's back was to the white building of the City Hall. Watching the helicopter land, he walked a few steps quickly and smiled softly. "Welcome to Xinyuan City, Marshal Yi." Yi Dongxing, who walked out of the helicopter, shook hands with Ning Qianqing warmly. He glanced around and laughed heartily. "Xinyuan City is beautiful. Mayor Ning, you're young and promising." "You flatter me, Marshal Yi." Ning Qianqing asked calmly, "Do you think I should eat first or report to you first?" "There's no need to report." Yi Dongxing waved his hand. "There is a tacit understanding between Xinyuan City and the parliament. This tacit understanding will not change in the past and will not change in the future. I came here on a whim and wanted to take a look and tell you a piece of news by the way." Ning Qianqing glanced at him and nodded. "In that case, get in my car. Let's go back and talk. I've already informed Baidian. Let's have a small meeting." "Not here?" Yi Dongxing glanced at the beautiful city hall with a playful look. "Not here. Let's go back to the headquarters." Ning Qianqing shook his head. He had just had a morning meeting with the chief judge of Xinyuan City and the relevant personnel here. Xinyuan City was on the right track, but the law was still being perfected. Tianan was a chaotic place where wars and conflicts never stopped. Under such circumstances, the rapidly developing Xinyuan City had become the target of settlement for almost everyone in Tianan. The population of Xinyuan City had been increasing. As of last month, the population of Xinyuan City had exceeded 600,000. In addition, they received a steady stream of settlement applications every day. Under such circumstances, a set of effective and clear legal provisions was what Xinyuan City needed most, because it represented the real order on the surface. Yi Dongxing took a deep look at Ning Qianqing and said nothing. He followed Ning Qianqing into the black Volkswagen parked in front of the city hall. The headquarters that Ning Qianqing mentioned was, of course, the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. The headquarters was built on the edge of Xinyuan City. It was originally a large farm. After the renovation, it had been brand new. The main building of the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace was a 6-story castle. It was steady and heavy and looked extremely majestic. The Volkswagen kept bumping on the road. Yi Dongxing looked at the mountain-like castle in front of him and nodded with a smile. "Not bad. The road condition is a little bad." Ning Qianqing smiled. Some time ago, the city held a meeting and approved the second phase of the expansion plan of Emperor Dong's palace. The area of Emperor Dong's palace will be expanded from the original 300 acres to 750 acres. The project is not small. Many nearby buildings will be demolished, and the road condition also needs to be improved. The area we are now in is basically a large construction site. It will be much better if we go forward. Yi Dongxing nodded and suddenly asked, "What's the construction period?" 16 months. Ning Qianqing said quietly, "It's neither fast nor slow. Xinyuan City has plenty of time and a bright future, so I'm not in a hurry. My only requirement is the overall image and quality." After 16 months, the second phase of the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace will be expanded. If everything goes well, we will launch the third phase of the expansion plan, which will cover more than 2,000 acres. In terms of municipal administration, the eighth phase of the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace has been planned, which is expected to take 5 to 8 years. At that time, the entire Xinyuan city will be included in Emperor Dong's palace and be integrated with it. At that time, Tiannan may be the Tiannan province. Yi Dongxing nodded and said thoughtfully, "The new city plan." Ning Qianqing nodded. "If you need help, just let me know." Yi Dongxing smiled. "Not for the time being." Ning Qianqing was also smiling. In fact, people in Jianghu State contact me every day, wanting to develop projects in Xinyuan City. In this regard, I have set up a city construction department. We welcome foreign investment, but only if it is in line with the urban construction and future plan of Xinyuan City, the scale of Emperor Dong's palace, environmental protection, transportation, industrial chain, etc. Xinyuan City has just started, so everything is just a rough idea. We can't focus on the present but on the long term. We have to consider what will happen decades or even centuries later. Emperor Dong's palace won't fall. What we do today should be a fortune in the future instead of a burden for future generations. Specifically speaking, whether it's Emperor Dong's palace or me, what we want is very simple, and that's order. Ning Qianqing's voice was steady and clear, but there was a kind of indescribable spirit between the lines. Yi Dongxing looked at him quietly, feeling a little emotional. Li Tianlan chose Ning Qianqing to be the mayor of Xinyuan City, which was the best choice. This year Ning Qianqing was 28 years old, and it had been 5 years since he met Li Tianlan. At the age of 27, Li Badian was now an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. With the Nirvana sword he really reached the peak of combat effectiveness. His martial arts progress was rapid, and now he was one of the top experts in Emperor Dong's palace. Yi Huayu, who had been following Li Badian closely, also entered the thunder-shocking realm a few months ago. And Yu Qingyan, who was the closest to Ning Qianqing and had promised to marry him when Li Tianlan came out, was only one step away from the thunder-shocking realm. Ning Qianqing was still at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. His martial arts progress was not great, and it could even be said that it was just passable. But as the mayor of Xinyuan City, he did better than countless domestic senior officials at the same level. This year Ning Qianqing, who was 28 years old, was 10 years younger than Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old. There was only one level difference between them. Maybe many years later he would become the core spokesperson of Li Tianlan in Jianghu State, supporting a new group to move forward in Jianghu State and on the international stage. Just like him and Wang Tianzong. Or more than that. Ning Qianqing calmly introduced the plan of Emperor Dong's palace and Xinyuan City to Yi Dongxing. The car passed the bumpy construction site and everything in front of them suddenly opened up. The castle was getting closer and closer, looking more and more majestic. The black Volkswagen stopped on the lawn in front of Emperor Dong's palace. A man who looked about 30 years old opened the door for Yi Dongxing and said with a smile, "General Yi, welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Yi Dongxing glanced at him. As one of the members of Jianghu State who paid the most attention to the development of Emperor Dong's palace, a series of information about him immediately appeared in his mind. "Fairy tale, is everyone here?" Ning Qianqing asked casually. "Yes, Badian just talked to Minister Dongqing on the phone. Everyone who can come is here." The man smiled and his voice was calm. Fairy tale was not his code name but his real name. He could be said to be the youngest high-level official in Emperor Dong's palace. The so-called young referred to the time when he became a high-level official. Fairy tale himself was also one of the graduates of the 2 academies in the previous batch. He graduated from the Deep Sea Academy and ranked very high in the Deep Sea Academy. During the final maneuver of the 2 academies, his team was broken up by Jiang Shangyu's 3000 World. In the end he could only participate in the individual maneuver. After the final maneuver, he, who had a lot of invitations in hand, finally applied to join Emperor Dong's palace and came to Tiannan with the first batch of elites of the two academies. He officially entered the thunder-shocking realm half a year ago. After many inspections of him and his family, Emperor Dong's palace decided to upgrade his authority. Fairy Tail was the youngest high-level official, but among the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace, he was relatively old. Moreover, he was very steady and capable. At present, he looked like a chief steward in Emperor Dong's palace, responsible for the daily operation of Emperor Dong's palace. Strictly speaking, he took over the position of Wang Yuetong. However, Li Tianlan had not returned to Emperor Dong's palace, so now the power distribution inside Emperor Dong's palace was vague. Fairy Tail did not have a clear position. Not only him, but even Li Baidian did not have a clear position. However, the fact that he could participate in the core meeting of Emperor Dong's palace was enough to show his identity and importance. Yi Dongxing shook hands with Fairy Tail seriously and sighed. Emperor Dong's palace in Xinyuan City was developing all the time. Fairy Tail was one of the typical examples. His family was not a wealthy family in Liaodong, Zhongzhou State, but it had a strong local influence. Fairy Tail's father was the mayor of a city in Liaodong, but he did not have a clear mark of a group. After Fairy Tail entered Emperor Dong's palace, his whole family immediately adjusted their pace of development. The whole Tong family was absolutely in line with Bai Qingqian, the speaker of Liaodong. At present, Fairy Tail's father had been recommended as a member of the provincial government of Liaodong. There were rumors that he would be elected as the mayor of the capital of Liaodong, and his rank had reached the level of deputy governor. Although the level of deputy governor was not very high, after Bai Qingqian left Liaodong, Fairy Tail's father would definitely take on more important positions. There was no doubt that the whole Tong family would become Li Tianlan's power in the future. They might even become the spokesperson of Li Tianlan's new group in Liaodong. There were many people like the Tong family. Emperor Dong's palace recruited thousands of graduates of the two academies at one time. The saying that the poor learn literature and the rich learn martial arts was still applicable now. Those who could enter the ice-condensing realm or even the fire-flaming realm at a young age generally needed a lot of resources. A large number of graduates had their own families, big or small. Their individual influence was minimal, but together they were a huge force. The new city plan, the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan's prestige, and the order in Tiannan became clearer and clearer. Step by step, countless families, big and small, were completely integrated. Countless families approached Emperor Dong's palace with the help of their families who worked there. These small and medium-sized forces, which were originally looked down upon by other big forces, were like fish in water under the influence of Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace was also expanding its influence in various regions of Zhongzhou State with the help of these small and medium-sized families. This win-win situation could not be destroyed. The small and medium-sized families needed to unite around Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace also needed this kind of unity to further strengthen itself. Emperor Dong's palace spread its tentacles to countless places in Zhongzhou State with the help of these small and medium-sized families. These tentacles might be very weak, but the huge shadow of the giant group had covered them. Countless follow-up personnel were constantly adjusted and resources were redistributed. This was a situation that a rising superpower would inevitably encounter in the process of its rise. Fairy tales were a typical example. A young force like Emperor Dong's palace was filled with young people everywhere. No one could say for sure if the unknown young man and the unknown family behind him would eventually reach the real peak and become the main component of a superforce. Most importantly, next year. This year's graduates of the two academies would graduate again. Emperor Dong's palace and Xinyuan City, which were just starting to be vigorous, were the forces that many students wanted to join. In this sensitive period, if everything went well, Li Tianlan's position in Zhongzhou State would become more important. If there were no accidents, most of this year's graduates and valuable elites would be recruited by Emperor Dong's palace. This kind of explosive development was enough to make everyone tremble in fear. Yi Dongxing walked into the castle thoughtfully. The inside of the castle was huge and magnificent. The castle had 6 floors and thousands of rooms. The main body of Emperor Dong's palace was running effectively inside. Yi Dongxing quietly watched the people coming and going in front of him. He could even clearly feel the rigor and efficiency. That's it for now. The follow-up needs a lot of improvement. It looks a little messy. Sorry to embarrass myself in front of you, Commander Yi. Ning Qianqing said with a smile. There was some pride in his eyes. Today he could be said to be the most popular mayor in the whole Zhongzhou State. But in his heart, he preferred to regard himself as a member of Emperor Dong's palace. The future of everyone here was related to him, and his future was related to everyone here. Yi Dongxing quietly watched everything in front of him. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said softly, "Respectable and formidable." Ning Qianqing smiled and said no more. He led the way into the elevator. The elevator went straight to the 6th floor. Outside the door was a large and simple conference room. All the senior members of Emperor Dong's palace who could come were sitting here. The atmosphere was silent and depressing. Yi Dongxing glanced around and found many famous people in the whole Jianghu state and even the whole dark world. Li Beidian didn't need to say much. Among the 4 famous swords of Mount Shu, Li Beidian often mocked himself by saying that his great void sword was really weak in the early stage. After entering the thunder-shocking realm, Li Beidian's great void sword intent became more elusive and unpredictable, and his sword energy was treacherous. It could completely match an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Among the young people of Jianghu state, the most dazzling were undoubtedly Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao. The second was the low-key and unpredictable Jiang Shangyu. The third was Li Beidian. Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City, seemed to be completely silent after the maneuver of the 2 academies. Li Beidian had become a typical example of a latecomer catching up. The potential he showed made everyone look forward to it. Many people even asserted that his future achievements would surpass Wei Kunlun, the first senior brother of Mount Shu. He could even keep up with Li Tianlan and move forward with Li Tianlan. Sitting next to Li Beidian was Lin Yuxian, the commander of the Nightmare Army. He was the only high-level official with a clear position in Emperor Dong's palace, a real major general specially approved by Jianghu state. Currently, the main military forces of Emperor Dong's palace were 2 small troops. The Nightmare Army was one of them, and it was also the sharpest sword of Emperor Dong's palace. It was mainly responsible for external battles. The situation in Tianan was complicated. The Burning Legion, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and various other forces were mixed together, and there was constant friction. The Nightmare Army was the main fighting force. Xinyuan City had been established for more than a year, and now the Nightmare Army, which had less than 2,000 people, had made outstanding military achievements. Few people could be sure of what Lin Yuxian was thinking. According to the rules of the Lin clan, from the moment he entered Emperor Dong's palace, he had withdrawn from the direct line of the Lin clan, given up his identity as the heir, and formed a branch of his own. Yi Dongxing had vaguely heard some rumors. It was said that Lin Yuxian's Nightmare Army was just a starting point, and it was also a team lent to him by Li Tianlan. Li Hong had died and Li Guangtu was neither close nor distant. Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace was destined to be Emperor Dong's palace. Therefore, the heir of the Lin clan planned to rebuild Zhuanyuantai of Jianghu state with Li Tianlan's full support. Therefore, the cooperation between the two was unbreakable. If this rumor was true, Kunlun City would definitely make an extremely fierce reaction. But Lin Yuxian was also not to be trifled with. Although he rarely fought, many facts had proven that in terms of martial arts he was even stronger than Li Beidian. If such a figure wanted to rebuild Zhuanyuantai, even if he was so low-key that he almost had no sense of existence, his every move was also a figure that could provoke Kunlun City and even Jianghu state. Beside Lin Yuxian sat a little giant who was mighty but looked very simple and honest. With a height of more than 2 meters, he was majestic and broad, and his every move seemed to carry explosive power. When he saw Yi Dongxing's eyes sweeping over, his thick arm moved as if he wanted to raise his hand to salute, but in the end he put his arm back. Yi Dongxing narrowed his eyes and smiled without saying anything. This giant was the leader of another army in Xinyuan City. In addition to the Nightmare Army, there was another army in Emperor Dong's palace called the Praetorian Guard. The Nightmare Army was responsible for external combat, and the Praetorian Guard was responsible for internal defense. The commander of the Praetorian Guard was Jade Pool's first disciple, Su Chu, a real powerhouse. Now he was also at the peak of the Thundershocking realm, but in terms of strength alone, he could completely crush most of the half-step invincible realm experts. In Tianan, Su Chu was just in charge of defense, but he was also famous for his fighting prowess. Beside Su Chu sat a slender woman. She looked to be in her 30s. She had short hair and was charming and beautiful, but also as sharp as a knife. Sitting beside Su Chu, she looked extremely petite, but her aura seemed to completely suppress Su Chu. Among the several young people in Emperor Dong's palace whose future was worth people's expectations, this might be the only one who had really reached the half-step invincible realm, and was only one step away from the combat capability of the invincible realm. There was a complicated look in Yi Dongxing's eyes. Seeing her might remind him of the biggest traitor of the Wang family of Beihai. Now the woman in front of him was no longer as famous as Wang Xiaoyao, but she could still be regarded as a top expert in Emperor Dong's palace and even in Zhongzhou state. She was the woman who had refused several invitations from Situ Tsangyue and Tribulation. She was the deputy commander of the Praetorian Guard in Emperor Dong's palace, the real leader, and the current eldest daughter of the Bai family in Yuzhou, Bai Yuming. She was the daughter of Bai Qingqiao and the niece of Bai Qingqian. She joined Emperor Dong's palace, which in some ways represented the will of the giant group. It could even be said that she was the representative of the giant group here. Ning Qianqing sat down next to Bai Yuming, a very casual position. In such a big office without Li Tianlan, there was no such thing as a seat of honor. Next to Ning Qianqing was the sacred guard of the Li family in Li Honghe's era, Yu Donglai, the famous doctor of poison in the Dark World decades ago. The old master was completely in a state of retirement in Xinyuan City. Even in high-level meetings he could come and go as he pleased. In recent years his condition had deteriorated severely. Now he was completely out of the thunder-shocking realm and could barely exert the strength of the fire-flaming realm. His spirit was not very good, but since he was called the Doctor of Poison, as long as he was alive and sober, everyone would be afraid of his existence. There was no one around Yu Donglai. 3 or 5 seats away, at the end of a whole row of young people, Du Hanin was sitting there alone, silent and looking a little lonely. Now she could be said to be the real first assassin in Emperor Dong's palace. In terms of lethality she might not be as good as Bai Yuming, but in terms of speed, her destroyed and mutated wind vein gave her an unparalleled advantage. She was a member of Emperor Dong's palace, and also a member of Sai City, or it could be said that she was the representative of Sai City in Emperor Dong's palace. Yi Dongxing had learned about Du Hanin's past. During the difficult time when her wind vein was completely destroyed by someone with hatred, in order to survive in the Sky Academy and keep a glimmer of hope of revenge, this young lady, who used to be a prominent family, sacrificed too many unimaginable things for ordinary people. For example, body. It only took 10 credits to have a night of pleasure with this woman, who came from a prominent family and had the wind vein, and who was extremely outstanding in terms of figure, appearance, and temperament. At that time, Du Hanin was very popular in the entire Sky Academy. No one knew what she had experienced during that time until she paid a huge price to stay in the academy and met Li Tianlan. Her wind vein was mutating into dual wind veins. As a student of Tribulation, Du Hanin was now second only to Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud in Sai City. She was the elusive first assassin in Emperor Dong's palace. A real assassin seemed to be always alone. She had no friends and was not close to anyone. She always sat alone in a corner, silent and meditating. Yi Dongxing glanced at Du Hanin thoughtfully. No one knew what he thought of. His eyes flickered and finally he shook his head. The young high-level officials sat in a row. Sitting opposite several young people at the long conference table were Eagle King, Tianin, and other old people of the Li family. Some of them came from the purgatory of Heaven capital. It was a betrayal but a return. This group of old people only recognized Li Honghe. After Li Honghe died they only recognized Li Tianlan. Could be said that they were absolutely loyal. Compared with the young people they were more experienced and steadier, and could cope with all kinds of situations more calmly. The replacement of the old and the new formed the high-level structure of Emperor Dong's palace today. Yi Dongxing saw everything clearly. Although he already had the information of these people in his mind, after seeing them with his own eyes, he could not help but feel a little scared. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Su Chu, Bai Yuming, Ning Qianqing, Du Hanin. What a luxurious lineup. Among these people, except for Ning Qianqing, everyone had the hope of breaking through to the invincible realm. Lin Yuxian and Li Beidian would have no problem breaking through to the invincible realm. The only thing they needed was time. Su Chu, Bai Yuming, and Du Hanin might not be as good, but everyone's future goal was at least the peak of the invincible realm. And Li Tianlan. And Dongqing Rushi, who was still in a coma. If Tribulation, who was seriously injured, and Situ Tsangyue, Yi Dongxing's mouth could not help but twitch. He suddenly found that although Emperor Dong's palace still needed time so far, it had grown to a point where everyone had to face it seriously. For the current Wang family of Beihai, without Wang Tianzong, Emperor Dong's palace was qualified to be the opponent of the Wang family of Beihai. And Emperor Dong's palace was still growing and strengthening. Their leader was very young, and so was the new generation of high-level officials. Moreover, they had the absolute cohesion and strong aggressiveness common to new forces. As long as Li Tianlan was still there, as long as Emperor Dong's palace was still there was no need to care whether Emperor Dong's palace was the most powerful or not. Because as long as it was there, it would continuously attract all kinds of talents to take root in Shenyuan City. The new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace would include the entire Shenyuan City and turn Tiannan into a province with it as the core. The scene in front of him was like hundreds of years ago when Beihai was just established. It was a feeling of blood boiling. It was a feeling that the future was really in his hands and he could try to control it. Fairy Tale pulled over a chair and sat down casually. Yi Dongxing sat down slowly. After a long silence, he laughed and said, "I'm full of emotions." There was obvious sigh and emotion in his voice. Everyone sitting in front of him right now, if they were fated to meet again in a few years, perhaps they would be in a different attitude. "General Yi, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't pay attention to formalities. Let's cut to the chase. What can I do for you this time? Please tell me directly." Li Beidian looked at his colleagues around him. Seeing that they didn't mean to speak, he directly set the topic. He was a swordsman, not a politician. He was most impatient with idle chatter. In fact, the whole atmosphere of Emperor Dong's palace and Shenyuan City was like this. Even Ning Qianqing, who was in politics, was straightforward in his words and actions. He would not talk nonsense if he could. Yi Dongxing took a deep look at him, nodded, and said, "Well, now you should know about the plan termination, right?" There was a moment of silence in the conference room. Everyone subconsciously narrowed their eyes. Li Baiqian's eyes were a little cold. The plan termination. This was the news he just got after talking to Dongqing Wudi on the phone. He didn't expect the game to be so fierce now. Tens of thousands of troops had begun to blockade the desert prison. This was completely escalating the game into a war. Qin Fangqing was really desperate. Li Beidian didn't know if this was stupid, but he was sure that what Qin Fangqing was doing now was absolutely unwise. If Qin Fangqing were to lose, one could imagine what would happen to him. Even if he were to succeed, it would not be a good thing for Qin Fangqing personally. His term in office was coming to an end. After he retired, it would be difficult for him to maintain a strong influence after this incident. No one was willing to be too close to such a crazy prime minister, even though his craziness was not really selfish. Yi Dongxing looked at the silent crowd quietly. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "I want to know your attitude." At this time, he didn't have much practical purpose in coming to Tiannan. His main purpose was to demonstrate, not to Shenyuan City but to the parliament. The exposure of the plan termination was bound to make the relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Mount Dibing closer. At this time, Yi Dongxing came to Tiannan to formally cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. The news spread to the parliament. The parliament couldn't be without pressure. In this way, Qin Fangqing might get less support. After all, even if he sent troops to blockade the desert prison, the others in Emperor Dong's palace were not dead. "What do you think, General Yi?" Bai Yuming suddenly asked. Yi Dongxing was stunned. He looked at Bai Yuming and said slowly, "The war is coming." Bai Yuming narrowed her eyes. Before she spoke, Yi Dongxing continued, "The Prime Minister has ordered the Beijiang army to blockade the desert prison. If I'm not wrong, the special envoy of the parliament should be on his way to Shenyuan City." "Is this a threat?" Ning Qianqing raised his eyebrows. "What else?" Yi Dongxing said blandly, "The Prime Minister's plan is crazy and bold, but it is really effective. They have blocked the prison. In a short time, it is difficult for us to contact His Highness. The Prime Minister not only wants to prevent His Highness from knowing about the plan termination, but also to warn Emperor Dong's palace. Now that His Highness is blocked by the army, if Emperor Dong's palace wants to cooperate with Beihai, it will be an enemy. When the war breaks out, they will not show mercy to the enemy. Emperor Dong's palace and Emperor Dong's palace will be sacrificed. This is probably what the special envoy means. If you continue to cooperate with Beihai, they will not guarantee the safety of Emperor Dong's palace, Shenyuan City, and His Highness." A strange look flashed across Li Baiqian's eyes. He chuckled and said, "General Yi, you are more like the special envoy of the parliament now." "Ah." Yi Dongxing laughed. "Anyway, it's just a set of words. I just want to know the attitude of Emperor Dong's palace. I have told you the special envoy's threat. Do you have any concerns? You should ask if Zhongzhou State has any concerns." Eagle King's old voice rang out. "Does he dare to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and young master?" "He doesn't dare." Yi Dongxing said with certainty, "Even if he dares, he can't do it." Su Chu scratched his big head and said in a muffled voice, "What did Minister Dongqing say?" He was not asking Yi Dongxing but Li Beidian. Li Beidian hesitated and shook his head. "The minister just informed me of the plan termination and the blockade of the Beijiang army. He said nothing else." Everyone was stunned. There were many meanings of nothing. Or it could mean nothing at all. Was it because Dongqing Wudi was not sure about the current situation? Or it was because Dongqing Wudi could not make a decision for Emperor Dong's palace? Did the Wang family of Beihai do anything? Li Beitian suddenly asked. Yuatong is Xingxiao's sister and one of the core members of Beihai. Although she has some conflicts with her family now, this identity will not change. Whoever attacks the core members of Beihai must be prepared for Beihai's revenge. This is Beihai's bottom line. No one can touch it. Beihai will not compromise, and it is impossible to compromise. Last night, Beihai killed 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state lurking in Beihai and hundreds of all kinds of elite intelligence personnel. Yi Dongxing said blandly. At the same time, Beihai will send a team of experts to break through the defense line of the Beijiang army and try to get in touch with His Highness Li Tianlan. This plan may be fast or slow. Before that, we hope to know the attitude of Emperor Dong's palace. When Emperor Dong's palace loses contact with His Highness Li Tianlan, facing the planned termination, will you compromise or fight back? Everyone quickly glanced at each other. In fact, there was no need for hesitation or discussion. Before Yi Dongxing arrived, they had made a clear decision. Let me correct your words, General Yi. Ning Qianqing said slowly. Yuatong is indeed the palace master of the Wang family of Beihai, but she has left Beihai. Now she is the hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. It's just a temporary misunderstanding with Tianlan. Their relationship will not change. Yi Dongxing raised his eyebrows, and the smile in his eyes was hard to read. Even if Emperor Dong's palace loses contact with Tianlan temporarily, Emperor Dong's palace is still Tianlan's palace. The hostess of Emperor Dong's palace is the target of planned termination. If we don't fight back but retreat, what's the point of Emperor Dong's palace? Ning Qianqing continued. So, Yi Dongxing smiled and was satisfied. Mayor Ning, what do you mean? I will go to Beihai right away. Ning Qianqing did not speak. Du Hanin's cold voice sounded directly. She stood up from her seat, and her exquisite figure looked very proud under the light. The first batch of elites of Emperor Dong's palace will arrive in Beihai this evening. We need a camp. Yi Dongxing was stunned for a while, then nodded and said with a smile, no problem. His body relaxed and he looked very relaxed. General Yi, you just said you wanted to say 2 things? Ning Qianqing glanced at Du Hanin, then turned to look at Yi Dongxing. Yi Dongxing nodded. Second, His Highness was imprisoned in the desert prison because of Qi Mulan. Whether Qi Mulan committed treason has not been confirmed for a long time. The task force is already investigating. We will use all means to provide evidence of Qi Mulan's treason. In this way, His Highness will be innocent, and the Prime Minister's imprisonment of His Highness will be even more unreasonable. You, Li Beidian frowned. Yi Dongxing said this sentence very calmly. However, he smelled a hint of true danger from it. I've already said it. We're going to fight back. Yi Dongxing said lightly. Li Beidian was slightly shocked and said softly, you have a big plan. We are just cooperating with each other for mutual benefit. If this plan succeeds, you will also gain a lot. Yi Dongxing said, what's your attitude in the desert? I'll go there. Tianyin, who had been sitting next to Eagle King, said slowly. He returned to Emperor Dong's palace from the Purgatory of Heaven capital as soon as Xinyuan city was established. Purgatory of Heaven capital. Emperor Dong's palace. It was no longer the Li family. But the young master of the Li family who deserved his loyalty was still there. I can go there. Tianyin said slowly, if I can succeed it will be the best. If I fail, after all, I came from the Purgatory of Heaven capital. You can also put the blame on the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Zhongzhou state won't believe it, but at least there will be a buffer. Chen Fangqing sealed the prison, which is equivalent to imprisoning Tianlan. When he did this, he didn't take Emperor Dong's palace seriously at all. Now we don't need any leeway. Lin Yuxian, who had been silent, suddenly said with a blank expression. General Lin, what do you mean? Yi Dongxing's eyes flashed with a tentative look. Lin Yuxian smiled lightly and said quietly, I'll go. Everyone was stunned for a moment. Lin Yuxian's calm voice sounded again, but it was like thunder in everyone's ears. Not only me but the Nightmare Army will also go north with me. There are more than 40,000 troops, and there are invincible realm experts in charge. It's difficult to break through their blockade if there are fewer people. I'll lead the Nightmare Army directly to break through them. Everyone's spirits were lifted. It was not shock. It was excitement. Lin Yuxian had always been low-key and gentle in Emperor Dong's palace. No one expected him to be so tough. Break through them. This sentence was really refreshing. Nightmare army? Yi Dongxing muttered. And Shenyuan's sword. Lin Fengting's voice was soft and indifferent. When he mentioned Shenyuan's sword, he sounded like he was talking about an ordinary army instead of the ultimate army of the Lin clan. Don't forget, in addition to Qin Fangqing sealing Tianlan, the patriarch of the Lin clan is still with Tianlan. I'm a branch of the Lin clan. When I learned that the patriarch was trapped, I went to pick him up. Isn't it reasonable? Lin Yuxian said softly, I just don't know if the prime minister is ready to be the enemy of the Lin clan. He gently knocked on the conference table and looked at Qin Fangqing. Arrange for the Nightmare Army and Shenyuan's sword to enter the country. Is there a problem? What? Yi Dongxing asked directly. Lin Yuxian yawned and said lightly, let's do it tonight. Yi Dongxing nodded. Before he said anything, a secretary suddenly walked to Fairy Tail, and whispered something in his ear. Fairy Tail frowned slightly, and his expression looked a little strange. What's the matter? Lin Yuxian asked. Ha, Fairy Tail smiled. General Yi is a prophet. The special envoy of Jianghu state has arrived. Where is he? Lin Yuxian was stunned. Outside the door. Fairy Tail shrugged. Shall we let him in? Outside the door? Li Baidian subconsciously raised his voice and then sneered. He's really overbearing. Even if Yi Dongxing entered Shenyuan City, he would inform the city hall or Emperor Dong's palace when he approached Shenyuan City. This was the most basic etiquette. However, this so-called special envoy came directly to the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace and even deliberately avoided detection in Shenyuan City. Before they met, the overbearing feeling of victory had already hit them in the face. Li Baidian narrowed his eyes and smiled coldly. Let's go and have a look. Yi Dongxing also stood up. Everyone left the conference room at the same time and entered the elevator. The elevator went all the way down and finally stopped on the first floor. The elevator door slowly opened. An extremely arrogant voice directly passed through the huge hall and faintly came over. Go away, who do you think you are? What do you think this place is? I'm standing here on behalf of the Jianghu State Parliament. What? When did Emperor Dong's palace break away from the sequence of Jianghu State? I represent Jianghu State and I can go anywhere in Jianghu State. You and you. Is no one in Emperor Dong's palace clear of their identity? I don't care what meeting they have. Let the person in charge here come to see me now, right now. The voice sounded indistinct. But since it could pass through the huge hall and still reach everyone's ears, one could imagine how loud the voice was. Hey, it sounds like Qi He. Yi Dongxing suddenly laughed. Qi He. Li Baidian was stunned. Why didn't he go to Sun and Noon? Why did he come here? Sun and Noon is Chu He. Chu He, you idiot. Ning Qianqing couldn't help but complain. Li Baidian laughed carelessly. I know. I'm just kidding. Qi He, I've heard of him. He's a mad dog in the southwest. I heard that he even talked back to Marshal Yi. Not only me but also Minister Dongqing and Minister Qi Baitsong. He talked back to him. Yi Dongxing said with a smile. Li Baidian shook his head. Listening to the endless roars, his eyes grew colder and colder. The so-called mad dog in the southwest had its own story. Qi He was the deputy chief of staff of the southwest military region. His military rank was not high but he was a major general. But he could be said to be a direct descendant of the prince group. He had directly talked back to many members of parliament and even magnates many times. If anyone offended the interests of the prince group in the military, they would usually send Qi He to bite him. Qi He had his own wisdom and was not afraid of trouble at all. But every time he spoke for the interests of the prince group, so the prince group would definitely protect him. With his character, it was impossible for him to be promoted, but he could keep this position for a lifetime. Now the prince group sent Qi He here. Judging from his arrogance, it was likely that they sent him to bite someone again. Tut, a mad dog in the southwest. Li Baidian chuckled. He looked at Du Hanin, who was standing in the front, and suddenly asked, Sister Du, what should we do if he is bitten by a mad dog? Of course, hit him back. Du Hanin said without hesitation. Hit him back. Well, hit him back. Oh, hit him back, Li Baidian muttered to himself as he walked forward. Is it too easy for him? Tut, too easy for him. In the hall, Qi He's roar grew louder and louder, as if he wanted to flip the ceiling of the castle. In the dense sound of footsteps, Li Baidian and the others came directly to Qi He. Qi He was stunned. His eyes rolled and flickered. Finally he stopped roaring. He must have remembered his duty here. Are you looking for the person in charge of Emperor Dong's palace? Li Baidian tilted his head. Qi He narrowed his eyes and asked rudely, Are you the person? No, I'm not. Li Baidian laughed. The real person in charge is in the desert. As for here, each of us can be regarded as the person in charge. What do you want to say? Don't be so cheeky. Chihi's face darkened and said coldly, I know who your person in charge is. This time I'm here to talk to you about this matter. Li Tianlan is involved in treason and is now under investigation. As his force, Emperor Dong's palace is also a big suspect. The investigation team will come soon. During this time, I advise you to behave and don't act rashly otherwise. Otherwise what? Li Baidian gave him a playful smile. Young man, I think you still don't know the seriousness of the matter. Chihi sneered. Do you know why I'm here? I know. Li Baidian nodded. Aren't you here to threaten us? Naive? Threaten? The parliament never makes unnecessary threats. Li Baidian suddenly waved his hand and interrupted Chihi. We don't make unnecessary threats. So, do you mean the parliament wants a war? Chihi suddenly felt something was wrong. He was a mad dog but not a stupid dog. Since he could be so arrogant, he naturally had his own plans and was confident that he could calm down the atmosphere. However, he had just met Li Baidian, so he had to show his toughness so that they could have a chance to talk later. Moreover, since Li Baidian had changed the topic to this extent, how could he retreat? You don't know what's good for you. Chihi sneered. Jianghu state is giving you a choice. Don't be so shameless. If you want a war, the parliament can certainly give you a war. He stared at Li Baidian. He was thinking about how to say it to ease the atmosphere. It should be enough for him to be so tough. Even if he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, he should know the determination and strength of Jianghu state. While he was thinking, Li Baidian's voice rang in his ears. Oh, then a war it is, he said casually. Du Hanin seemed to feel a little bored. She walked to the door with her long legs. What? He couldn't believe it. He seemed to think he had heard it. Then a war it is, right? What did it mean? What the hell did it mean? Are you talking about a... He roared again with a red face. But Li Baidian didn't let him finish. He waved his hand and said casually, kill him. Swish. Chihi's roar was still echoing. Du Hanin, who passed by him, waved her hand. A sharp and thin wind blade was pulled out of the small space in an instant. The invisible wind blade suddenly cut through Chihi's body. Blood suddenly burst out. Chihi's whole body was cut into two pieces. His eyes were wide open, and his expression was filled with fear. Then his eyes quickly dimmed. Du Hanin, covered in blood, walked to the door and said, take him away. Some of the nearby imperial guards who could no longer hold themselves back rushed forward, casually carrying Chihi's corpse as they walked out. I say, Ning Qianqing looked at the blood on the ground and felt a little annoyed. Is it necessary for so many people to carry a body? Someone come and clean the ground. In any case, nothing can happen to Li Tianlan. Otherwise, you and I can't afford this responsibility. Yuzhou Hidden Dragon Sea. The sun was shining in the winter afternoon. In the quaint office, Li Huaqing turned to look at Qin Fangqing, who was sitting on the sofa, and said very clearly, I know. Qin Fangqing took a big drag on his cigarette and said in a dull voice, he didn't sleep well last night. After getting up, he was busy making arrangements everywhere. Until now, his eyes were bloodshot. But he didn't intend to rest at all. He was still holding on. I still say the same thing. I don't think you're right to block the desert prison. It's too easy to escalate the conflict. Li Huaqing waved his hand impatiently. Qin Fangqing was busy, and Li Huaqing was not idle either. Things changed too fast. Overnight, no one expected the situation to escalate to this point. Strictly speaking, the planned termination itself is too intense. Li Huaqing tried to restrain himself, but in the end he couldn't help but blurt it out. He knew very well that what had already happened. Saying it again would only make people angrier. With his mentality, he shouldn't have said such things, but at this time he couldn't help it. He was already extremely annoyed with planned termination. If it weren't for this plan, things wouldn't have developed to this point of no return. Who was Li Tianlan? Who was Wang Xingxiao? What kind of power was behind these two people? The planned termination directly targeted those who were closely related to these two people. Directly obliterated. What did this mean? When the news spread, it didn't matter whether they were killed or not. For people like Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao, as long as you wanted to kill, you deserved to die. Fortunately, the planned termination didn't succeed. Otherwise, at this time, there might be a war in Jianghu state. Qin Fangqing couldn't refute. It was true. All this was because of the planned termination, so it was so chaotic. He wouldn't think about what would happen if it succeeded. With failure in front of him, It made no sense to imagine the scenes after success except to temporarily numb himself. I'll take control of the situation. Chen Fangqing took a drag of the cigarette, and his voice became hoarser. I can support you to block the desert prison. Things have come to this point. Even if it's not feasible, we have to try. But I'm against war, and especially against any irreconcilable impulse with Li Tianlan at this stage. Prime Minister, do you understand what I mean? Li Huaqing decided to be more thorough. Chen Fangqing raised his head and looked at Li Huaqing. His eyes were extremely serious. Li Huaqing was also looking at him. His eyes were also extremely serious. What do you mean? Chen Fangqing asked slowly. That's what I mean. What do you want to do? You'd better hurry. I don't think you can trap Li Tianlan for a long time. I believe you don't think so either. 3 days, 5 days, half a month? 1 month is already the limit. I hope that everything can come to a conclusion during this period of time. Otherwise, he circled around the desk a few times and said blandly, you're on your own. Li Tianlan doesn't have the guts. Chen Fangqing suddenly stood up. It seemed that because he was old and didn't have a good rest last night, he used so much strength that it caused a temporary lack of oxygen to the brain. After his whole body shook violently, he sat down again. Li Huaqing's eyelids twitched, but he didn't speak. I heard that he has been practicing martial arts recently. He hasn't shown up in the prison for a long time. Even if he gets out, so what? I have tens of thousands of troops to block the prison. No one can get close to the desert prison. Li Tianlan won't know what's going on outside. Does he dare to attack tens of thousands of troops when he's not sure about the outside information? Does he dare to break out of the blockade? This behavior is tantamount to treason. How can he be so crazy if he doesn't know the termination plan? As long as we don't let the outside news spread, Li Tianlan won't dare to break out in a short time. Within 2 months, I solved Beihai. Why should I be afraid of Li Tianlan? Anyway, Wang Yuatong is not dead. If Beihai is not dead, why should I kill Wang Yuatong? At worst, I'll find Wang Yuatong and ask Li Tianlan for punishment. Chen Fangqing really thought so. He didn't expect to trap Li Tianlan for too long. All his hopes were focused on eliminating the threat of Beihai as soon as possible. As long as Beihai was no longer a threat, Li Tianlan could always find a way to appease it. The most important thing was that Wang Yuatong was not dead. His killing intent might provoke Li Tianlan's hostility, but as long as Wang Yuatong was not really dead, things could still reach a relatively fragile balance. In this way he would get rid of a tumor for Jianghu state, which was a great contribution. What you said is very reasonable. My bottom line is that we can't go to war. Prime Minister, I'm very disappointed with planned termination. He has ruined many of our plans. I can't change that, but I can tell you my bottom line. You'd better grasp the extent of the blockade in Beijing. When Li Tianlan steps out of the desert prison, or when someone breaks through the blockade of the desert, we'll cooperate with each other. Otherwise, our cooperation will end here. He spoke slowly and heavily. This paragraph directly explained everything thoroughly. Chen Fangqing suddenly raised his head. There was anger, viciousness, and madness in his eyes. All previous efforts in vain? Failure on the verge of success. I can't joke about the future of Jianghu State or the academics. Li Huaqing suddenly threw a stack of documents on his desk. I have to maintain a stable situation. All games must be played on the bottom line of stability. I have never thought of war. Yes, we can win, but so what if we win? Once this balance is broken, it will bring disaster to Jianghu State. All of it, damn it, disaster. Your planned termination exists to break this balance. So stupid. If it weren't for the fact that we can't change this situation, our cooperation would have ended by now. He took a deep breath and lit a cigarette. His hand that was holding the cigarette was trembling slightly. Chen Fangqing looked at Li Huaqing in a daze and did not speak for a long time. He had worked with Li Huaqing for more than 10 years, from the vice president and the deputy prime minister to the president and the prime minister. In all these years he had never seen Li Huaqing so angry, nor had he ever heard him swear. Today was the first time. You'd better solve Beihai quickly. This is the only way for us to continue our cooperation. Otherwise, when Li Tianlan comes out, you can only pray for yourself. Li Huaqing walked to the desk and sat in the chair. He lay on his back with one hand covering his eyes and the other holding a cigarette. In the smoke, he was silent for a long time before he said faintly, I'm tired. Chen Fangqing took a deep breath, turned around and strode out of Li Huaqing's office. The sun spread freely in the hidden Dragon Sea. It was soft and fresh. But the cold of winter was everywhere. Chen Fangqing tightened his clothes and looked serious. He only felt that the winter temperature seemed to be cold to the bone. The phone rang. Qin Fangqing walked to the edge of the hidden Dragon Sea, stood under a tree and answered the phone. Prime Minister, I have arrived at the blockade front. On the phone, Gu Qianchuan, the acting governor of Kunlun City, said in a steady voice. Very good. Is there anything going on inside and outside the blockade line? Qin Fangqing asked. Not yet. Gu Qianchuan smiled and said calmly, the prison probably doesn't know the specific situation. They should be discussing countermeasures. It seems that Li Tianlan's closed-door training is correct. The prison is very quiet at present. As for outside the prison, neither Beihai nor Emperor Dong's palace can come here in such a short time. It seems that today's blockade should be relatively successful. Qin Fangqing said, and did not speak again. Gu Qianchuan did not speak again. They were silent. Across the phone line, the atmosphere seemed to suddenly become a little awkward. Qin Fangqing naturally knew why. The Prince Group and the newly emerged Special Warfare Group had always been the best buddies. Even from another perspective, when the Li family collapsed and the Southeast Group suffered a great loss, Gu Xingyun took over, and the Special Warfare Group was completely a large group promoted by the Prince Group. However, over the years the two sides naturally had differences. Gu Xingyun's position was getting more and more stable. Of course, he had his own interests and was unwilling to be a follower of the Prince Group. The relationship between the two sides was gradually drifting apart. But anyway, the cooperation between the two sides was generally pleasant. Some local conflicts did not affect the overall situation at all. When Qin Fangqing faced Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan, he could be natural. But after he and Li Huaqing went to the desert, the relationship between the two sides seemed to have completely changed. There was no impenetrable wall. They wanted to use the entire Kunlun city to exchange for Li Tianlan's loyalty. This kind of news could not be concealed. Qin Fangqing could understand their resentment, but he could not explain this kind of thing at all. Instead, the more he explained, the worse it would be. Now it seemed that he could only use this action to make up for the relationship with Kunlun City. After it was hopeless to win over Li Tianlan, Kunlun City suddenly became important in Qin Fangqing's eyes. Their rise was very short, their foundation was a little weak, their strength was a little weak, and their martial arts inheritance was not the best. But anyway, the two invincible realm experts in Kunlun City were real. The Special Warfare Group could be one of the 6 group, and even vaguely ranked ahead of the North Group. Naturally, it had enough strength to be worth winning over. Qianchuan, you have to work hard during this time. Remember, in any case, the desert must be completely blocked. The people inside can't come out and the people outside can't go in. It must be completely blocked. Qin Fangqing said in a deep voice. Gu Qianchuan said faintly, it shouldn't be a big problem, but you should pay more attention to some people in the country. Who? Qin Fangqing frowned. Hidden God Saint. Gu Qianchuan said faintly. Hidden God Situ Tsangyue of Jianghu State, Saint Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu. Both of them would stand by Li Tianlan without any consideration. Li Tianlan was the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace and the young governor of Sai City, while Wei Kunlun was the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. These two invincible realm experts were now injured, but they could still exert a certain combat effectiveness, especially Situ Tsangyue, who was on the divine list. Even if Gu Qianchuan had made great progress in recent years, he felt that he was unlikely to be Situ Tsangyue's opponent without using his trump card. I'll talk to them. Qin Fangqing rubbed his scalp and said slowly, both Situ Tsangyue and Wei Kunlun have things they can't let go of. Jianghu State should be able to restrain their actions. Prime Minister, what I want is not should. Gu Qianchuan smiled faintly. Qin Fangqing snorted and suddenly said, your realm should have stabilized now. Qianchuan, I need to know your specific strength. Gu Qianchuan was silent for a long time. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe, among the population of 1.6 billion in Jianghu State, there were 5 invincible realm experts. They were Wang Qianzong, Tribulation, Gu Xingyun, Situ Tsangyue, and Gu Qianchuan. Being able to enter the invincible realm was enough to show Gu Qianchuan's talent and luck. However, his potential was almost exhausted when he broke through to the invincible realm. If compared horizontally among the invincible realm experts, his potential was probably the worst. For a long time he could not even stand on the last position of the holy list. Now he finally stabilized his realm under the polishing of time. If he really attacked with all his strength, Gu Qianchuan did not know how strong he was. So what he could say was just a general idea. If I don't care about the cost, I can win against Saint, but it's difficult to kill him. If he is seriously injured, so will I. Facing Situ Tsangyue, I'm no match for that woman. But with so many troops to help me, it's not a problem for me to stop her. If the worst happens and two invincible realm experts break through here together, unless you allow me to kill one of them, things will be very troublesome. Kill one of them? Qin Fangqing was a little stunned. I can kill one of them. At worst, I can make one of them lose all combat power in an instant and be seriously injured and dying. Gu Qianchuan said silently, the Prime Minister seems to have forgotten that Setting Sun is currently in my hands. Setting Sun, one of the 12 murderous weapons. It was originally the core trump card of Sai City. However, after Situ Tsangyue fired a shot at Gu Xingyun more than 2 years ago, Setting Sun fell into the hands of Kunlun City. This was a punishment for Situ Tsangyue and compensation for Gu Xingyun. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Setting Sun ranked in the middle. But in terms of power, its power could only be in the middle or lower level. However, Setting Sun's speed of replenishing energy was the fastest among the 12 murderous weapons. Setting Sun was several times faster than Human Emperor, which was the slowest to recharge. In more than 2 years, Setting Sun could barely fire once. In the Battle of the Invincible Realm, as long as Gu Qianchuan found a suitable opportunity, he could completely injure or even kill Situ Tsangyue in an instant. After all, even if he was not Situ Tsangyue's opponent, Situ Tsangyue did not have the strength of Gu Xingyun at that time. She was still injured. If he wanted to find an opportunity, it was easy with the murderous weapon's shooting speed. The possibility of Situ Tsangyue dying under this blow was more than 80%. With the murderous weapon in hand, as long as Qin Fangqing allowed people to die, Gu Qianchuan was 100% sure that he could seal the prison. After all, if his murderous weapon did not strike, its deterrent power would not be less than that of the peak of the Invincible Realm. It was just that the Invincible Realm expert of Zhongzhou State took the murderous weapon of Zhongzhou State to kill the Invincible Realm expert of Zhongzhou State. Was it possible? There was a flash of almost crazy killing intent in Qin Fangqing's eyes. He forcibly suppressed the thoughts in his mind, shook his head and slowly said, "Don't shoot to kill unless it is absolutely necessary." Every Invincible Realm expert was the most precious treasure of a country and the most powerful deterrent power of a country. Even in a superpower like Zhongzhou State, Invincible Realm experts were also very precious. Even if the positions of the groups were different, no one was willing to consume the Invincible Realm experts in an internal fight, let alone be willing to do so. But at this moment, Qin Fangqing said that it was absolutely necessary. What was absolutely necessary? Qin Fangqing did not give a specific explanation. Gu Qianchuan did not ask either. I'll remind you again, Qianchuan. As if he was afraid that Gu Qianchuan could not understand, Gu Xingyun slowly said, now is the most critical moment. Can even be said that this is a war. Blocking the desert must be carried out to the most thorough extent. No one can enter or leave. No matter who the violator is, no matter how much it costs. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, kill without mercy. I see. Gu Qianchuan was silent for a while and said lightly. Qin Fangqing gave a hum and silently hung up the phone. He stood on the edge of the hidden sea and looked at the calm lake. After a long time he took out his mobile phone again and dialed the number of St. Wei Kunlun. In the desert of Beijiang. In the temporary station of the 43rd Army, Gu Qianchuan, who hung up the phone, looked at the mobile phone in his hand with a blank expression. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly began to chuckle coldly. Gu Qianchuan had never been a handsome man. According to the aesthetic standards of normal people, his appearance was even below the ordinary standards. In the past 2 years as the acting city master of Kunlun City, his body looked thinner. He was like a skeleton wrapped in skin standing in the desert. As he sneered, his whole face became distorted. His sunken eye sockets, high protruding cheekbones and mean lips were twisted. He had an indescribable cruelty and evil. First Elder. A tall and thin man who looked more like a skeleton than Gu Qianchuan, slowly came over. At the beginning, when Gu Qianchuan was the acting city master, he disliked the title of First Elder very much. He dreamed of the position of city master and thought for many years before he sat in that position. What he liked most was to be called city master or even the acting city master. However, in the past 2 years the dark world was surging. Under the great pressure, Gu Qianchuan had long lost the joy of being city master. He did not care about the title. He was even afraid to hear the title of city master now. Every time he heard these 2 words he could clearly feel a great pressure. Yes. Gu Qianchuan nodded casually. Looking at the man in front of him, he narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled. Do you know why I brought you here? The man shook his head honestly. The thin man, who seemed to break at a touch, was not the best in Kunlun City. His strength barely reached the thunder-shocking realm. No matter how bad the foundation of Kunlun City was, it was not difficult to find some people who were stronger than him. However, Gu Qianchuan brought him here. His code name was Spectre. He was the person in charge of all the torture work in Kunlun City. He was also the most cruel and most aggressive psychopath in Kunlun City. He was only in charge of the torture work. Because if nothing unexpected happens, you'll have a lot of new toys in a few days. Undead, I'm very satisfied with you, very satisfied, especially in this kind of situation. Your existence is much more important than anyone else's. Spectre stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. The picture was a little disgusting. But he had an excited expression all over his face. Don't worry, First Elder. He grinned grimly. I will treat every toy in my hands well. Gu Qianchuan nodded with satisfaction. Spectre was indeed a real psychopath. His torture technique was enough to make people feel what was despair and worse than death. And this was exactly what Gu Qianchuan needed. Let's wait and see who will rush out first. Will it be inside or outside? He narrowed his eyes and sat at the door of the desert tent. He was silent, like a fisherman with super patience. It's better for some big shots to come. Gu Qianchuan muttered to himself like a madman or a psychopath. I heard that Qin Weibai is also here. He comes, well, there is no one here. It should be my toy, not yours. It should be a toy that needs to be carefully protected. If it is someone else, maybe Xiao Mahai is good? There is no one in the desert prison. I don't know when the idiots from Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace will come here. Li Baidian Ning Chenqing Haha Wangling, a captive. How long can you play? Spectre trembled all over and seemed to be very excited. I have some interesting drugs. He smiled. Even if you are skinned and have your tendons pulled, you can at least live a few more days after being injected with this drug. First Elder, if you are interested, I can guarantee that you will have a good time. I hope so. Gu Qianchuan smiled non-committally. In fact, I want Li Tianlan to come out now. I heard that the 13th flight is not in the desert prison now. If I only deal with Li Tianlan, I am still confident. If he comes out, I will let him try countless ways to die. He had completely stabilized the invincible realm. According to the standards of the last holy and holy lists, Gu Qianchuan was barely qualified to enter the top 10 of the holy list. He had a large number of troops and officers on standby. As long as Li Tianlan dared to appear, Gu Qianchuan was bound to take him down. At that time, the blockade of the entire desert prison would be completely over. Even if Li Tianlan had made great progress in the past year or so, so what? With the murderous weapon in hand, he was not afraid of anything. Moreover, Gu Qianchuan always felt that this spear was not as perfect as Li Tianlan, whether it was used on Situ Cangyue or holy disciple Wei Kunlun. It was far inferior. The possibility of this happening was not high, but under such circumstances, there was still hope to capture several important figures from Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai alive. Gu Qianchuan had made up his mind. No matter who it was, he would let Spectre use the cruelest means to slowly torture them to death. He would skin them and pull out their tendons, hang their bodies on the flag of Zhongzhou state. Gu Qianchuan did not care about the so-called anger and hatred at all. He only knew that he came to the desert this time because of Chen Fangqing's order. Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai hated him as much as they hated the prince group. In this way the two sides would be firmly tied together. At least in the plan of the prince group, there was no possibility of letting Li Tianlan replace Kunlun City. 20,000 words should be the longest chapter since I started a book or even wrote a book. Chapter 846. When Saint came to the third floor of the hospital, several doctors in white were talking and walking out of the corridor. They met face to face. The doctors raised their hands and saluted subconsciously. They were not doctors of this sanatorium, but professors from the private hospital of the giant group. They were all senior military doctors with strong military habits. Saint waved his hand casually. We meet several times a day. Don't be so polite. How's the situation? Overall it's good. The leading doctor smiled bitterly. He said nice words, but there was distress in his voice. His Highness's fingers moved once 2 months ago. During this time, we paid close attention to his physical condition and recorded detailed data. His Highness's physical data has been changing in a good direction, but the speed is very slow. Judging from the current peak data, it will take a long time for him to wake up. The doctor paused and said cautiously, maybe it's a long time that we can't even speculate. Saint furrowed his brows tightly. He was not surprised by this result. But every time he heard it he felt a little annoyed. He had also seen the detailed data recorded by the doctors. In his opinion, the data that represented the physical condition was completely messy. Some of them were higher than others and some were lower than others. Countless data, which could even represent the recovery of various organs of the human body, were placed in front of him like a heavenly book. Which aspect of the data you mentioned is the most serious? Saint asked. It's serious in all aspects. The doctor looked serious. But the most serious is His Highness's brainwave. His brainwave value is very low and it grows very slowly. Sometimes it is even in a state of decline. From this point of view, His Highness probably doesn't want to wake up. Saint suddenly fell silent. Was he disheartened? He had loved a person for many years and they had been apart for many years. He missed her day and night. He tossed and turned, longed and waited countless times, and every day felt like a year. The unimaginably heavy and majestic emotion accumulated in his heart day after day, and he carried it on his back year after year. The last time they met, he watched her die in front of him, burning and turning into ashes. He didn't even say a word. What was despair? Maybe he was really desperate at that time. Saint was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "I understand." The doctors instinctively saluted again and walked past him while discussing among themselves. Saint hesitated for a moment, but still continued to move forward. The third floor of the hospital wasn't big and there weren't many injured people living there, such as Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi, Black Tortoise Li Wangxing and Vermilion Bird Yi. As time passed, more and more people were discharged from the third floor, and now there was only one person left on the third floor. He had been in a coma for almost 2 years, and he had only managed to move his fingers 2 months ago. Saint came to the ward and pushed the door open. The man who was once recognized as the strongest assassin in the entire dark world and even dared to fight against the real heavenly sun was lying on the sick bed, breathing weakly and lifelessly. Situ Tsangyue sat by the side of the bed, holding a comb to gently comb his hair. She calmly looked at her unconscious little brother, her expression so gentle it made one's heart ache. Lu Yun, the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau, stood aside and watched this scene motionlessly like a statue. Upon seeing Saint enter, Lu Yun moved his body and nodded. He said softly, "Your Highness." Saint patted him on the shoulder and looked at Tribulation lying on the bed. Looking at Tribulation, who was lying on the bed, she whispered, "I just met the doctor and asked him. He's recovering well, at least getting better. Although it's been a long time, there's still hope for him to recover." Situ Tsangyue nodded and said softly, "What's the matter?" Saint hesitated and shook his head. "Nothing." Situ Tsangyue glanced at him with some doubts, but she didn't ask much. She just said, "When do we set off?" "Set off?" Saint raised his eyebrows. "To the desert." Situ Tsangyue spat out 3 words with a calm and indifferent expression. The blockade of the desert prison by the Beijiang military region had become the biggest news in Jianghu state. Ordinary people didn't know, but people with certain information channels knew what it meant. The blockade this time might not be the key to the next election and the game with Beihai, but it was enough to determine the position of Emperor Dong's palace in this revolution. As long as Emperor Dong's palace could break through the blockade, whether from inside to outside or from outside to inside, once Li Tianlan got in touch with Emperor Dong's palace, their cooperation with the Wang family of Beihai would officially begin. If the blockade remained unmoved, Beihai would lose allies like the giant group in Emperor Dong's palace. At least they would first lose Li Tianlan, a main combat force. Moreover, if the blockade was not broken, the giant group would have many scruples in the cooperation with the Southeast group. Situ Tsangyue certainly understood this. She didn't want to comment on Li Tianlan's choice. In her opinion, there was nothing wrong with letting Emperor Dong's palace replace Kunlun City, but there was nothing wrong with letting Emperor Dong's palace become the second Wang family of Beihai. It was just that the choice was different. She knew very well that after Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing visited Li Tianlan in person, Li Tianlan showed his intention to cooperate with Beihai. In the eyes of the two giants, it was undoubtedly a betrayal. Once Chen Fangqing really took over Beihai, how good would the end of Emperor Dong's palace be? The most important thing at the moment was to break the blockade of the Beijiang military region. Today, Emperor Dong's palace could come up with a very good lineup. But if they wanted to concentrate the greatest combat force, then she and Saint would naturally be the most luxurious lineup. It was also the lineup with the most confidence to break through the blockade. Saint glanced at Situ Tsangyue. His eyes were a little strange. "What's wrong?" Situ Tsangyue frowned slightly. "So, you haven't received a call from someone from beginning to end?" Saint seemed to have understood something. No one could deny that Situ Tsangyue cared about Li Tianlan very much. But after all, she was the governor of Sai City. Situ Tsangyue was not an irresponsible person. If she had received a call from someone at this moment, it would be impossible for her to go to the desert without any worries. Who called? Setut Sangyue was a little confused. Qin Fangqing. Saint shook his mobile phone and said with a poker face, 10 minutes ago. He just called me and his tone was very tough. Setut Sangyue suddenly narrowed her eyes. Her eyes were a little cold. Threatening you? Sort of. Saint smiled freely. He said that Mount Shu is the main part of the Special Warfare Force of Jianghu State anyway. As the first senior brother of Mount Shu, I have the responsibility and obligation to take care of the interests of Jianghu State. Such a Mount Shu will not let people down. Listen how interesting that is. It seems that I have to hand over my position in Mount Shu as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's really a grieving for me to be the deputy palace master. So you agree? Setut Sangyue's voice was a little low. Saint fell silent and did not speak. Then I'll go by myself. Setut Sangyue stood up. The murderous weapon, Setting Sun, Saint said slowly, now it should be able to fire, right? Calculating the time, it should be about time. The face of Drifting Cloud, who had been silent, changed slightly. So what? Setut Sangyue sneered. No one knows Setting Sun better than I do. So I'm right. Setting Sun can already exert its power, right? Saint narrowed his eyes. Setut Sangyue was silent for a while and said lightly, it doesn't matter. That's true. Saint nodded. But I don't think you should go to the desert now. You should go to Sai City. Setut Sangyue said with some doubts, I think I understand why Qin Fangqing called me. Saint laughed and said, he thinks I'm a pushover. Obviously he doesn't want to provoke you or he doesn't want to threaten you openly. But do you think others will turn a blind eye to the fact that you and I are here? Qin Fangqing can call me and threaten me with the whole Mount Shu. I have to compromise. How can he forget you? He doesn't threaten you, but it doesn't mean that he won't touch Sai City. Saint looked into Setut Sangyue's eyes and whispered, the dark world of Snow Country is now under the control of Wang Xiaoyao. Setut Sangyue's eyes suddenly changed. Sai City was on the border between Jianghu State and Snow Country. Qin Fangqing didn't need to call to threaten Setut Sangyue. With Wang Xiaoyao, the power of Snow Country could keep Setut Sangyue in Sai City. But she thought of the sword he left in Sai City before he went to the desert, and there was a trace of hesitation in her eyes. As for the desert, you don't need to worry. Saint said lightly, Qin Fangqing doesn't know that even if he doesn't make this call, I won't go to the desert. Even without us, His Highness has a way to solve the blockade. No one can predict the future. Setut Sangyue said seriously, now there are not only more than 40,000 troops in the blockade line, but also Gu Qianchuan. Gu Qianchuan may not be afraid, but how can Tianlan deal with an invincible realm expert, a murderous weapon, and a large number of troops? By strength. Saint said, there is no need to predict the future. As long as he has the strength to solve everything, there will be no accidents. You do have a lot of confidence in him. Setut Sangyue shook her head. But you and I should both know the invincible realm very well. At this age, it is even impossible for Tianlan to enter the invincible realm in the next few years. At his age, his lack of physical strength is the most important problem. I believe that he can face Gu Qianchuan, but I still say that no one knows Setting Sun better than me. She knew the operation mode of Setting Sun, the energy storage time of Setting Sun, and the power of Setting Sunday. In the hands of an invincible realm expert, even if Setting Sun was not famous for its power, its instantaneous firing was equivalent to the full blow of a peak invincible realm expert. If Li Tianlan couldn't enter the invincible realm, how could he deal with the blow of the murderous weapon? A very strange light flashed in Saint's eyes. It seemed that every time he mentioned Setting Sun, there was something wrong with him. But Setut Sangyue didn't notice it. She lowered her head, looked at her brother in a coma, and said calmly, I need a reason to convince me. Saint put the phone back in his pocket and said quietly, because I really want to see the legendary Ruthless. Chapter 847. Setut Sangyue had never heard of Heartless. Just like in this era, most people didn't know the carefree nature of Beihai and the Lin clan. But Saint had seen stories about Heartless. Yes, what he saw and knew were just stories. They were close to legends. It was like the sword intent he had carefully studied. The legendary sword intent had become a little real in him, and it had made him enter the invincible realm. What about Heartless? Who is Heartless? Setut Sangyue was a little stunned. At this moment she recalled all the famous experts in the dark world, but found that she had never heard of this code name at all. As for the recluse? Setut Sangyue had never been interested in this. This world was extremely cruel, but it was also extremely beautiful. It was full of temptation and warmth. How could there be a real recluse? He could enter the invincible realm and control the power at the peak level of the dark world, but he hid himself? He was not mysterious at all. He was a complete idiot. The Lin clan was also a recluse. But who didn't know the Lin clan among the top forces in the dark world? Who dared to provoke the Lin clan? The Lin clan had countless branches all over the world. Their greatest confidence came from the headquarters of the recluse Lin clan. His Majesty, who was extremely mysterious and low-key, also secretly accepted Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi and others as disciples, and was planning the Battle of Beihai. People like Li Kuangtu also knew of his existence. Whether he was an idler or a schemer, as long as one had the ability in life, he would inevitably have the responsibility and ambition to match his ability. How could it be so easy to be good to himself? Even if there were still nameless invincible realm experts in the dark world who had not been exposed, there were very few of them, and most of them were secretly hidden by the superpowers. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, in today's dark world, the invincible realm experts exposed to people were all invincible realm experts. Those who did not dare to show up could only be trash. It was impossible for trash to enter the invincible realm. Therefore, there was no so-called recluse invincible realm experts in the dark world now. So who was heartless? This question was very simple, at least in Situ Sangyue's view, because there was no trust crisis between her and Saint. However, Saint was stumped by such a simple question. Who was heartless? Saint was silent for a long time and then smiled bitterly. I don't know. He really did not know who Wu Qing was. In that messy story there wasn't much cause and effect. It was like the reality that was right in front of them. All that was said was what happened. As for why it happened, perhaps the story would know, but the people who read the story would not. He only knew that Wu Qing had suddenly appeared by Dong Huang's side and then became Dong Huang's only bodyguard. You don't know. Situ Sangyue's eyes were a little strange. She gently tilted her head and slightly opened her red lips. There was a little surprise and anger on her face, which had defeated the aging charm. It was so charming that it made people dizzy. I really don't know. Saint shifted his gaze subconsciously. That's not important. What's important is that Wu Qing is absolutely loyal, and his strength is far better than yours and mine. He had already guessed it in his heart. He combined it with the story and some of what Qin Weibai had told him before. However, he had not confirmed it, so it was naturally meaningless to say it out. Situ Sangyue lowered her head thoughtfully. Governor, I suggest that you return to Sai City immediately. Actually, you don't have to worry. Don't forget that His Highness isn't the only one in the desert. Boss is there too. Saint said. Situ Sangyue was slightly stunned and thought of Qin Weibai. She didn't know why. Although Li Tianlan was strong enough now, in her heart, she still felt more at ease when Qin Weibai was mentioned. Did she expect the current situation? Situ Sangyue asked. Not really, but it's not completely unprepared. Saint said quietly, Boss once said that Wang Yuatong is very important. At the right time, we might as well release some false news to make the situation more chaotic. So, she also told you about Wu Qing? Situ Sangyue asked. Saint thought for a moment. Although it was not the case, there seemed to be nothing wrong with it. He nodded his head and grunted in acknowledgement. Does she know Wu Qing's identity? Situ Sangyue combed her hair. I don't know. Saint smiled. It doesn't matter. What matters is Wu Qing's position. He is Dong Huang's bodyguard, and the only bodyguard around Dong Huang. The Dong Huang he was talking about was not the currently Tianlan. In that era, there were many experts in Emperor Dong's palace, covering the sky and the sun. Dong Huang's edge shrouded the whole dark world. In Emperor Dong's palace alone, there was more than one expert at the peak of the invincible realm. But only Wu Qing was qualified to be the only bodyguard around Dong Huang. What kind of scene was that? In the end of that story, even the invincible chosen one would fail and die in her hands. But Wu Qing never had a defeat. Because of Wu Qing. The light slowly faded with heat and dryness. There was no wind tonight. The windless night in the desert was the best exquisite in the world. Boundless yellow sand. Endless starry sky. The stars were bright and the yellow sand was soft. The sky here was low and bright, looking desolate and empty. Xiao Mahai stood under the starry sky, feeling a little lonely. The night sky was beautiful. But he didn't like it very much. It was not because he was lonely. It was because it was difficult to lurk in such an environment. Not far away was the front line of the 43rd Army. Nearly 20,000 soldiers set up the first blockade line on the front line. About 10 miles away, an armored corps of 10,000 soldiers set up the second front line. 40 miles away, a semi-automatic artillery corps was the third line of defense. The outermost was the field corps. Yes, in one day 4 lines of defense had been set up outside the desert prison. The fourth line of defense just arrived here 2 hours ago. It was a reinforced division of nearly 10,000 soldiers. The total size of the desert blockade line had officially exceeded 50,000 people. The determination of someone in the council had been revealed. Xiao Mahai looked at the lights in the distance that almost lit up the whole desert, his expression solemn. He was a smart man but also a stupid man. There was no doubt about his loyalty to Li Tianlan. Because people like him, as long as they were sure that they had found an opportunity, they would not leave the slightest way for themselves. Li Tianlan had been in the desert for nearly 2 years. Xiao Mahai had done a lot of things, but it seemed that he had done nothing. He was the warden of the desert prison. But in the face of a prisoner, he gave up his dormitory and all his communication equipment. At the same time, he provided the most detailed information about the entire range of the desert prison, as well as some technical parameters of the Sky Aero Base and the Sky Eye Base. Dongqing Wudi and Yi Dongxing had been here. Military Counselor had been here. Li Baidian had also been here once. Qin Weibai had even lived here. This was the desert prison, the most strict and mysterious forbidden area in Jianghu State. But anyone who had something to do with Li Tianlan seemed to be able to treat this place as a hotel where they could come and go as they pleased. The small amount of funds in the desert every year was blatantly appropriated by Xiao Mahai in an almost extravagant manner. Birds and beasts, delicacies, famous cigarettes and wine. He even brought his daughter and sister here to serve Li Tianlan. He ignored the overt and covert warnings of Jianghu State, and did not care about the people who criticized him in the council. Even when Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing came, he only cared about Li Tianlan and completely ignored the 2 giants who stood in the highest position in Jianghu State. He did everything he could to the real extreme. There was no way out. But he gained Li Tianlan's trust in the shortest time. True trust and even appreciation. As a result, he was given opportunities that countless generals of his rank, and even those with better backgrounds than him, could not get. A year later, as Li Tianlan left the prison, the General Staff Headquarters, the Navy Headquarters, the Army Headquarters, and the Blood Battalion. He could choose any of these extremely prominent positions. Of the 4 positions, except for the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, which was the deputy, the other 3 were all real top leaders, which could be said to be the top positions with real power in the entire Jianghu State. This was enough to show how rich Li Tianlan was in return for him. But he did not want any of them. He really wanted to follow Li Tianlan and did not care about the so-called prominent positions at all. He often thought that the ancestors of the 7 sword-holding families above the clouds in Beihai must not have thought that their families would have today when they started their business with the chosen one of the Wang family of Beihai. Xiao Mahai occasionally thought about it and looked forward to it. He firmly believed that the chief butler of Emperor Dong's palace would be more prominent than the position promised to him by His Highness. Maybe not now, but definitely in the future. He cut off all his retreat routes and exchanged absolute loyalty for Li Tianlan's full trust. So until now, in the face of the vast army of more than 50,000 people and the invincible realm experts with murderous weapons, he still did not think about retreating, even though he knew that his chances of breaking out of the encirclement were slim. The blockade of more than 50,000 troops. If Li Tianlan was really locked here, Xiao Mahai could be sure that his end was doomed to be extremely miserable. Because after losing Li Tianlan, no one would let him go. So the army blockading the prison was not only Li Tianlan's business, but also Xiao Mahai's business. The greatest loyalty was nothing more than no matter what the problem was, as long as it was his boss's business, it would definitely be his business. So he did not think about retreating. In any case, he had to try his best to get out of here. Xiao Mahai took a deep breath and took a step forward. At the same time, Tianan Xinyuan City. In the night that came earlier than the desert. In front of the mountain-like castle of Emperor Dong's palace, a neat and uniform military formation had completed the formation. Silent, resolute, iron-blooded, piercingly cold and sharp. This was a small army of less than 2,000 people, but at this moment the spirit, energy and spirit of the entire army seemed to have risen to the peak. They didn't move at all, but they seemed to have a sharpness that could shake the world. Yi Dongxing watched this scene quietly. This was the nightmare army of Emperor Dong's palace, which had become famous in Tiannan. And directly opposite the army, standing opposite the nearly 2,000 soldiers, was a row of young people. Yes, a row. Lin Yuxian, Li Baidian, Bai Yuming, Yi Huayu, Fairy Tale, Ning Chenqing guarded Shenyuan City. The elders of the Li family assisted Ning Qianqing in guarding Emperor Dong's palace. Du Hanin and Su Chu led the first group of elites of Emperor Dong's palace into Beihai. Others. All the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace, one by one. They turned out in full strength and pointed their weapons at the desert. This was the final attitude of Emperor Dong's palace, and it was also their sharpness that they had never concealed. Without reservation they went all out and pressed forward. In the roar that spread through the night sky, a huge black shadow appeared in the night of Emperor Dong's palace. The black shadow gradually slowed down in the air. The large transport plane belonging to the Freedom Corps showed its full appearance in everyone's sight. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the transport plane in the air. An invisible flame of war seemed to be directly ignited in front of the castle of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Baitian glanced at Lin Yuxian. Other high-level officials were also looking at Lin Yuxian. Their positions were equal. But the Nightmare Army was the main force of Emperor Dong's palace in external combat. Lin Yuxian was the commander of the Nightmare Army. At this time it was natural for him to give orders. The transport plane blocked the starlight and cast a large shadow in the night. Lin Yuxian raised his head. He slowly stretched out his palm. The space fluctuated slightly. A pseudo-domain similar to the invincible realm but not pure flickered for a moment and disappeared instantly. Crack. An incomparably clear and melodious sound of friction suddenly rang out. His palm seemed to hold something. In an instant Lin Yuxian's aura rose wildly, and his whole person seemed to become a sharp and peerless long sword in an instant. The blue electric arc lingered in his hand. Lin Yuxian watched this scene quietly, as if he were looking at a half-step invincible realm expert in front of him. The shape of a long sword appeared in his hand. It was not one sword. It was two swords. Two sparkling and translucent scarlet long swords with an incomparably ferocious shape. The murderous aura rushed over. Lin Yuxian held two swords, looked ahead and said calmly, "Nightmare Army, let's go." An earth-shattering roar responded to him. Kill? No matter who it was. There was only one kind of treatment for those who stood in front of them. Kill. No matter who it was. Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and looked down at the long swords in his hands. Almost everyone's eyes were attracted by the two strangely shaped scarlet long swords. Li Baitian's eyes flickered slightly as if he was thinking. Others' eyes were a little blank. A little farther away Yi Dongxing stared at the two swords in Lin Yuxian's hands, and his eyes were extremely complicated. The world had been reincarnated. The old things reincarnated. The time reincarnated. Among all the people present except for Lin Yuxian, perhaps only he knew the two swords. It was hard to describe the excitement in Yi Dongxing's heart at this time. He took a deep breath and his eyes seemed to be a little warm. Hundreds of years ago, these two swords had conquered nearly half of Beihai's territory, expanded Beihai's 80,000 square kilometers of land to today's 160,000 square kilometers, turned Beihai into Beihai province, and made the Wang family of Beihai the top power in the Dark World. At that time, in that era, Mount Dibing, supported by these two swords, was really invincible and swept away everything. 300 years ago, in the unprecedented major crisis in Beihai, it was also these two swords that stabilized the foundation of Beihai province. That year, the heroic posture of the man named Li Xiuxin holding two swords still shone in the history of the Wang family of Beihai. And now, 300 years later, Lin Yuxian holding two swords stood in Tianan. He would go north into the desert. He would also go north into Beihai again. Yi Dongxing's body trembled a little and his eyes were full of tears. The two swords that had been sealed for nearly 300 years were held in Lin Yuxian's hands, fierce and quiet. In that initial era this was the sword of Beihai. But in that most glorious era, this was the sword of the ancestors of the Lin clan. In the initial era of the Li family more than 300 years ago, this was the sword of the ancestors of the Li family. In the final analysis, this was the sword of the ancestors of Zhuanyuantai. Two scarlet long swords. Divine punishment in the left hand. Divine punishment in the right hand. Chapter 848. The ghastly white light slowly swam across the boundless desert. It was the 11th hour since they entered the desert. At the forefront of the blockade, the formation of the 43rd Army was still neat, and the whole army was still in the highest alert state. Xiao Mahai approached the front cautiously, and his speed was getting slower and slower. His breathing was steady, almost without any ups and downs. One after another, subtle and almost imperceptible electric arcs covered his body. The space around him was slightly twisted, and he passed by groups of patrolling soldiers. The light in the distance shone over again. Xiao Mahai quietly glided to the left for a distance. He stood there motionlessly. A group of heavily armed soldiers walked past Xiao Mahai in silence. They held an amazingly bright flashlight in their hands, which shone in the direction of the depths of the desert from time to time, leaving white rays. The light in the distance shone on several soldiers passing by, paused for a while, and then continued to spread into the depths of the desert. Xiao Mahai was completely still. The light and darkness alternated, and there was a fine layer of sweat on his forehead. The light just now could have shone on him from a few meters away. He was not afraid of the soldiers close at hand, but he was most afraid of the light in the distance. This kind of light, which seemed to have a wide range of illumination, was not only used for illumination. More than 2,000 extremely delicate parts were installed inside the launcher. This was the latest technology developed by Jianghu State in recent years, codenamed Explorer. Even though the 43rd Army was one of the trump card armies of Jianghu State, explorers were not popular in the 43rd Army, and there were only 5 explorers in the whole army. The light of the explorer contained a very special ray, which was harmless to ordinary people, but it could accurately detect the energy source. The so-called energy, when used in martial arts, meant different realms of martial arts. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm. Ice and fire, lightning and thunder, they were all energy. The ray inside the explorer was extremely sensitive to all kinds of energy. Even if an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was in the strongest hiding state, he could not hide under the light of the explorer. After many experiments, it was known that only a few experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and a half-step to the invincible realm could escape the energy detection of the explorer. This also meant that even experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could not approach the place with explorers quietly. The explorer technology was a technology that all countries in the world coveted. It was also a technology that Jianghu State had always blocked. Even the Wang family of Beihai and the Beihai Corps were not equipped with explorers by Jianghu State. Even though North Sea had never given up on the pursuit of explorers, everyone could see the great strategic value of the explorer. The most suitable place for this thing was the army. It was true that it couldn't perceive the energy above the half-step invincible realm. But in the army of thousands of soldiers and horses, without the main formation in groups, what trouble could a few masters make? Even in the invincible realm, there was a limit to his physical strength. He was still afraid of thousands or even more troops. Once the explorers started to equip themselves on a large scale, any army's defense would be impregnable. Xiao Mahai was at the peak of the invincible realm. However, he had never thought of himself as a powerhouse in this realm. At best, he could only say that he was not bad in this realm, belonging to the average combat power. He was not confident that he would not be discovered by the explorers, so he could only try his best to avoid the lights. That was why the process of breaking through the encirclement was extremely difficult and tense. Another beam of light shone from afar. The pale beam of light swept across the night sky. It was indescribably arrogant and domineering. Xiao Mahai's eyes darkened for a moment. He gritted his teeth and quietly approached the edge of the 43rd Army. Gu Qianchuan was on the edge of the 43rd Army. For some reason, as the supreme commander of this blockade operation, he did not put the command room in the center of the 43rd Army. Instead, he chose the edge position that did not seem to have any advantage. Ouyang Pengfei, the commander of the 43rd Army, sat opposite Gu Qianchuan and said in a steady voice, "Your Highness, it's getting late. Why don't you take a rest first? Something happens, the 43rd Army is not made of paper. You can still deal with it. I will contact your Highness in person." "No need." Gu Qianchuan waved his hand casually and smiled lightly. "I didn't come here from Kunlun City to sleep." "I understand, but..." Before Ouyang Pengfei finished speaking, Gu Qianchuan shook his head and said slowly, "Keep an eye on Li Tianlan tonight. I know very well who Li Tianlan is. The whole dark world knows very well who Qin Weibai is. Both of them are now in the desert prison. In the face of the blockade, how can they really swallow their anger? Hey, neither of the adulterous couple is willing to swallow their anger. They will definitely take action. Emperor Dong's palace has just been established and is developing rapidly. Do you know what's most important at this time?" Ouyang Pengfei blinked and looked at the dense army outside the tent. He was somewhat at a loss. "Momentum," Gu Qianchuan said lightly. His tone was very indifferent, but it gave people a feeling that he was gnashing his teeth. Perhaps he thought of the time when Kunlun City had just replaced the Li family's Zhuanyuantai. At that time, Kunlun City occupied the power center of the special warfare system of Jianghu State. With the strong support of the Prince Group, the entire Kunlun City developed at an almost explosive speed in all aspects. Kunlun City was high-spirited and looked down on the world. But it was also at that time that Wang Tianzong of the Wang family of Beihai returned from traveling in the polar region and successfully entered the Invincible Realm. The first thing he did when he returned to Mount Dibing was to challenge Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun had no reason to refuse. Even if he didn't want to agree, he really had no reason. He was the god of war of Jianghu state. No matter what opponent he faced, he couldn't avoid the fight. Otherwise, the whole Jianghu state would be very disappointed. He was the governor of Kunlun City. If he flinched, the whole special warfare system of Jianghu state would also be very uneasy. He entered the Invincible Realm earlier than Wang Tianzong, and his realm had been stable. He didn't think he would lose. Kunlun City was developing rapidly. If he didn't accept the challenge, it would undoubtedly lower his own momentum. Therefore, without any hesitation, Gu Xingyun went directly to Mount Dibing alone. He was full of lofty sentiments and momentum. That challenge could be said to be a golden age in that year, but it was not Gu Xingyun who achieved it. The whole challenge took 9 seconds. One sword. Gu Xingyun was seriously injured and couldn't get up. This was Wang Tianzong in that year. The Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai, which had been somewhat turbulent, seemed to have completely calmed down because of this sword. Kunlun City, which had been developing rapidly, also suffered an unimaginable setback because of this sword. It no longer had the vigor and momentum of a rising force. Not only Gu Xingyun, but even Gu Qianchuan couldn't help thinking that if Gu Xingyun had won or ended in a tie, Kunlun City and the Special Warfare Group today would have been far stronger than they were now. Gu Qianchuan followed Kunlun City all the way from a rising force. Now he saw an equally ambitious rising force. Naturally, he knew what Emperor Dong's palace needed most at this critical moment. To some extent, this blockade was just a beginning. From the beginning of the blockade action to the end of the game in Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace couldn't escape everyone's sight since it was involved. For Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace, this was the key. Whether they could soar or not depended on whether they could not retreat. Jianghu state was very strong, so were other forces. If Li Tianlan hid in the face of the blockade, many people might understand, but more people would be disappointed. For example, in the battle between Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong, everyone thought that it was okay for Gu Xingyun to lose. After all, he was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. But when he really lost, everyone could not help but be disappointed. That sword also stabilized the world's impression of the Wang family of Beihai. There were only 2 kinds of superpowers in the dark world. One was the Wang family of Beihai. The other was other forces. The situation that Emperor Dong's palace was facing now was no less critical than the battle that year. At this time, as long as not everyone in Emperor Dong's palace was a fool, they would definitely make the toughest response in the shortest time possible and completely stabilize the prestige of Emperor Dong's palace with one spurt of energy. This was also the reason why Gu Qianchuan chose this location for his command room. He expected Emperor Dong's palace to encounter an unprecedented setback in this critical period and to form an irreconcilable personal feud with Emperor Dong's palace on behalf of the Prince Group. He had a murderous weapon, a stable realm, and a strong combat capability. He had many advantages, but he still chose this place as the headquarters. There was no other reason. It was just because it was on the edge of the 43rd Army. If things really couldn't be done, this was the most suitable place to escape. Well, the most suitable place to retreat. For a whole day, Gu Qianchuan was waiting for the reaction of Emperor Dong's palace. The more time passed, the more nervous he became. Rest? It was impossible for him to rest at this time. He was almost sure that there would be news coming out tonight. Otherwise, as long as the blockade lasted for more than 24 hours, those who observed the reaction of Emperor Dong's palace would be disappointed. The ear-piercing ringtone of the phone suddenly rang. Gu Qianchuan, who had intended to pick up the teacup, suddenly shook his hand, and he lost his composure for a moment. He took a deep breath, glanced at Ouyang Feiping and did not speak. Ouyang Feiping immediately answered the phone. The hurried sound in his ears suddenly exploded like thunder. It was Huang Tong, the commander of the Beijiang military region. An hour ago. Tianan Xinyuan City. 1,760 elites of the Nightmare Corps of Emperor Dong's palace boarded the large transport plane provided by the Freedom Corps. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, Bai Yuming, almost all the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace came out. Their destination was the desert prison. When the Nanyun military region of Jianghu state received the news and urgently sent fighter jets to intercept, the 2 large transport planes flying in the air did not hesitate and directly hit them. Of course they did not hit them. But the two large transport planes just rushed out of the interception of the Nanyun military region and had now entered the sky above the Southwest military region. In the face of the questioning of the Southwest military region, there was only one response on the transport plane. No explanation was given. Maybe they couldn't remember, or maybe they didn't have time to think about it. We are soldiers of Jianghu State. In the military plane of Jianghu State, there is no place in Jianghu State that we can't go. Chapter 849. Ouyang Pengfei immediately conveyed the response of Emperor Dong's palace. To be exact, it was a response from Lin Yuxian, the commander of the Nightmare Legion. In the territory of Jianghu State, where couldn't the army of Jianghu State go? Gu Qianchuan's curse words were stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something, but he could not say anything, because he thought of the nature of the Nightmare Legion. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary army could not go anywhere without receiving orders from the top. It could only stay in its own station and train. But that was a normal army under normal circumstances. But the Nightmare Legion was abnormal from the beginning. First of all, it was the foreign combat force of Emperor Dong's palace. Not to mention the special position of Emperor Dong's palace in the country, the Nightmare Legion was given great freedom since its establishment. In theory, the combat range of the Nightmare Legion was the world. It had the most simplified configuration, the most powerful mobility, and the most free combat style. All of this was specially approved by Dongqing Wudi. Even Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing agreed to it. At that time, no one could think of today's situation. So it seemed to be a coincidence. But no one expected that this coincidence would become a sharp sword to break through the blockade. Now the sharp sword was unsheathed, and the sharpness from thousands of miles away was constantly approaching the desert. The full Nightmare Legion. The Emperor Dong's palace turned out in full strength. Gu Qianchuan could feel the determination and strength of Emperor Dong's palace in this news. Thousands of miles away, whether it was mountains or seas, plains or deserts, they moved forward without retreat. This was the spirit of the entire Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Yuxian, Li Baidian, Bai Yuming, Gu Qianchuan thought of those names. Gu Qianchuan's heart trembled slightly. He was very excited and also a little scared. He really expected countless important figures of Emperor Dong's palace to break through the blockade here. He would teach Emperor Dong's palace an unforgettable lesson in the cruelest way. Li Tianlan would hate him. But he acted under orders. Before the action, the blockade had been defined as a war by Chen Fangqing. So how much Li Tianlan hated him would be how much he hated the Prince Group and Chen Fangqing. The Prince Group and Kunlun City would be directly tied to the same boat. This period of time was enough for Gu Xingyun to get through the period of serious injury. When he recovered and entered the peak of the invincible realm, everything would be another story. But now, Nightmare Legion. The most powerful force of Emperor Dong's palace marched into the desert from the south with unparalleled power. All the important figures in Emperor Dong's palace that Gu Qianchuan could think of were here. He had a murderous weapon in his hand and tens of thousands of troops in front of him. There were also countless experts of Jianghu State lurking in the blockade line and more experts of Jianghu State rushing over. The Nightmare Legion could not get through. Gu Qianchuan was sure of this. He was even sure that if he gave the order, the Nightmare Army, including everyone in Emperor Dong's palace, would be annihilated here. What kind of scene would that be? The Nightmare Army was the strongest fighting force in Emperor Dong's palace. If all of them were destroyed here, most of the properties Li Tianlan had built since he entered the secular world would disappear, and Emperor Dong's palace would only exist in name. No matter how he thought about it, it was impossible for him to swallow it. This was not a game, nor was it a war. This was extermination. As long as he dared to make a move, Li Tianlan was destined to fight to the death with the Prince Group. At that time, even if he walked out of the desert, there would be no place for him in the vast Jianghu State. Treason. All of Li Tianlan's actions were predictable. At that time, the entire Prince Group would suffer heavy losses because of Li Tianlan's wrath. Jianghu State would have one more powerful enemy. Even without Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan still had the power to make a comeback. Once Li Tianlan resisted, Mount Shu, Sai City, Jade Pool, and the Border Control Corps would be shaken. In order to get rid of Li Tianlan, Jianghu State would inevitably rely more on Kunlun City. If Li Tianlan made a big enough scene, it was even possible for Jianghu State to give up the game with Beihai. At that time, Kunlun City could join forces with Beihai again. Li Honghe had died. This time there was no room for compromise. The whole world would kill Li Tianlan together. Gu Qianchuan's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and he struggled more and more. He could really do all this with his current strength. But there was a premise. After burying most of the elites in Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, as the commander in the front line, could not escape, not to mention whether he could kill Chen Fangqing or not. If the murderous weapon did not kill Li Tianlan, Gu Qianchuan thought he could not live. Moreover, Li Tianlan also had a murderous weapon in his hand. The possibility of blocking the setting sun was not small. That was to say, he could do everything he imagined, but the premise was likely to be completely sacrificed his life. For Jianghu State? He shook his head subconsciously. But for Kunlun City? Gu Qianchuan was extremely painful. He could be sure that as long as he gave an order, Kunlun City could have an incomparably brilliant future. But such a future was almost impossible for him to see. Was there any meaning to such a future? Gu Qianchuan did not know. He really did not know whether it was meaningful or not for a while. He inadvertently found that with the response given by Emperor Dong's palace, he seemed to have stood at a crucial point, not only for Kunlun City, Jianghu State, and even the entire dark world. What the future would be like depended on his thoughts. Gu Qianchuan's facial muscles twitched fiercely. He looked at Ouyang Pengfei, who was silently observing him, narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked, "If Nightmare Corps launches an attack on us, what will the attitude of the 43rd Army be?" Ouyang Pengfei smiled. His smile was without any emotion. "Your Highness is the commander of the entire blockade operation. The 43rd Army will completely obey your Highness's orders." "Any orders?" Gu Qianchuan cursed in his heart. He stood up, no longer looking at Ouyang Pengfei's fake smile, and directly walked out of his command room. On one side was his own life, and on the other side was the future of his family. If it were 20 years ago, he would not hesitate to sacrifice himself to make Kunlun City go further. He also participated in the fierce battle to encircle and suppress Li Guangtu. In fact, all the participants in that battle, including Gu Xingyun, who was already in the invincible realm at that time, had the idea of sacrificing themselves to help their families. Today, 20 years later, Gu Qianchuan had reached the invincible realm. He had stabilized his realm and even hoped to take a small step forward and stand at the peak of the dark world. But he had long lost the courage and perseverance of those years. He was afraid of death. But he also wanted the future of Kunlun City not to be shrouded by the shadow of the Li family. So now he was not thinking about whether he should do it or not. Instead, it was how to survive after doing it. The explorer's dazzling light shrouded his figure all the way forward. Gu Qianchuan's body suddenly stiffened slightly. He slowly raised his head. In front of him, dozens of meters away, a void space was slightly fluctuating. Electric arcs, subtle enough to hide from the perception of thunder-shocking realm experts, contracted slightly in that space. They were not conspicuous, but in Gu Qianchuan's eyes, they were more dazzling than the explorer's light. Gu Qianchuan narrowed his eyes and suddenly laughed. The domain belonging to the invincible realm was fully opened in an instant. The space was forcibly distorted and turned into a vacuum. The rapidly spreading domain instantly enveloped that space. Countless electric arcs suddenly flashed for a moment, and then were completely extinguished. Gu Qianchuan's gaze fell on Xiao Mahai, the warden of the desert prison, who could not control his body in the invincible realm. His body lost gravity and floated higher and higher. Gu Qianchuan took a step forward. He crossed the distance of dozens of meters with one step. He appeared beside Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai stopped struggling and let his body float in the air. In the vacuum domain he could not speak or do anything. He just looked at Gu Qianchuan with dignified eyes, but his face was extremely calm. Gu Qianchuan hated such an expression. For nearly 2 years he had the highest power in Kunlun City, so he naturally had to contact Emperor Dong's palace, which was still under the leadership of Kunlun City in name. He had seen Li Beidian, Ning Qianqing, and many high-level officials in Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai's calm expression was almost the same as theirs. He seemed to have never taken the so-called invincible realm in Kunlun City seriously. He was calm, with a kind of indifference that he was not afraid of anything. More than once, Gu Xingyun wondered who had given these people such courage. Li Tianlan? Looking at Xiao Mahai, who was struggling weakly in front of him, Gu Qianchuan's smile and eyes gradually became a little ferocious. That little bastard can give you courage, but now who can save you? The domain of the invincible realm quickly shrank to the size of a person in the blink of an eye. The shrinking domain shrouded Xiao Mahai's body. He was still in an environment without gravity, rising 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters. His figure became smaller and smaller in Gu Qianchuan's eyes until it merged with the darkness. Gu Qianchuan snapped his fingers. Snap. There seemed to be a sound of breaking in the night. The domain, including Xiao Mahai's, was instantly broken. The frenzied power suppressed his body. In midair, Xiao Mahai's body fell madly, like a straight line. Bang! In the dull sound, Xiao Mahai's body directly fell at the feet of Gu Qianchuan. The soft ground of the desert and the physical quality of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm did not make him fall to death, but the huge impact shook his internal organs and seriously injured Xiao Mahai in an instant. A mouthful of scarlet blood sprayed from his mouth. He put his hands on the ground and tried to stand up. Gu Qianchuan came over and stepped on his head. Half of Xiao Mahai's head was directly stepped into the yellow sand by this powerful and heavy foot, stained with blood, which was shocking. Gu Qianchuan looked down at this scene and enjoyed it. He said with a smile, "It's so late. Where do you want to go?" About the divine retribution and divine punishment. This mother****. I made a mistake. I have to admit that I really forgot that the divine punishment had been broken when I was in the polar region, and it was discovered after a few days. I can't change it. I sincerely apologize. This is a bug, but it's hard to fix. I'll try not to write these two swords in the future. In fact, I personally like them very much. Chapter 850. When he opened his eyes, the plane was still in the sky. The large cabin was full of people and it was quiet. Lin Yuxian observed the comrades around him who were about to fight side by side. He breathed a sigh of relief and lowered his head to wipe the blade in his hand. Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Li family. These three families had always been the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the dark world for hundreds of years. No matter in which era, the supreme swordsman must come from these three places. For swordsmanship, the three families also had different understandings. Even the Li family, which was of the same origin as the Lin clan, had different emphasis on the same unique skill. Beihai valued momentum, the Li family valued intent, and the Lin clan valued state of mind most. Therefore, Lin Yuxian's meditation time had always been very short, but the effect had always been excellent. When the plane flew over the southwest province, he was the first to open his eyes after meditating before the war. His spirit reached its peak at the moment he opened his eyes. It was difficult to break through the blockade outside the desert. No one could deny this. Gu Qianchuan was an invincible realm expert with a murderous weapon. He was definitely not someone he could deal with now. Lin Yuxian was also clear about this. The possibility of breaking through the blockade was not high, but it did not mean that there were no variables. Lin Yuxian did not think that Jianghu state would be so determined to launch a war against Emperor Dong's palace. In a place he could not see, Dongqing Wudi and Qin Fangqing must have been at daggers drawn. The final result was still unknown. But once the action began, Lin Yuxian could not retreat at all. Blood stained the desert and a large number of casualties were inevitable. Once the casualties reached a certain level, would Jianghu state call a stop? The second variable was the desert. Li Tianlan was still cultivating his sword. Lin Yuxian did not know how strong Li Tianlan was now. But if he could know that the prison was blocked, he would inevitably respond. At that time they would cooperate from inside and outside. No matter how tight the blockade was, there would inevitably be some omissions. The third variable was the Wang family of Beihai. Blocking the desert prison meant that some people in the parliament would launch a real general attack on Beihai. The prison could not be blocked for too long, and Li Tianlan could not know the news for too long. The main purpose of Jianghu state blocking the prison was to make Mount Dibing lose a super heavyweight ally when dealing with the Wang family of Beihai. But before Li Tianlan broke through, Beihai would inevitably face the final battle. Beihai naturally understood this as well, so they would definitely take action during the lockdown operation. At this time Lin Yuxian knew very well that his father, Lin Fengting, was playing in Beihai. This matter concerns Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai. Will my father take action? These 3 points might seem illusory, but the most important fourth point was the most realistic. No matter what, it was impossible for the officers and soldiers at the blockade line to defend to the end. Emperor Dong was no longer a nobody, and neither was Li Tianlan. The military order was for them to appear on the front lines, but among the tens of thousands of soldiers, perhaps no more than 30% of them actually dared to fight to the death. The Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, all kinds of conflicts of interest, each with their own thoughts, their command and deployment in the state of war would inevitably have all kinds of problems. Although the number of the Nightmare Corps was small, they obeyed orders. Whether it was cohesion or average quality, they were far superior to the soldiers on the blockade line. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the Snowdance Corps under Li Tianlan's command crossed the borders of several countries with thousands of troops a day ago and defeated enemies more than 10 times their own, which was praised as a miracle by the Dark World. Lin Yuxian also wanted to create such a miracle and let the whole Dark World know that Zhuanyuantai was about to open. It was revived in his hands. Lin Fengting's arm, which was wiping the sword edge, stopped and was in a daze. A bottle of ice-cold drink was passed to him. When it touched his skin, it refreshed his mind. Lin Fengting froze and took the drink subconsciously. The illusory sword intent enveloped Lin Fengting, and the surroundings became a space that isolated all sounds. Li Baidian flicked his fingers casually and said with a smile, "Are you in a daze?" "No." Feeling the surrounding great void sword intent, Lin Fengting could roughly judge Li Baidian's comprehensive strength. He took a deep look at him and laughed. "I'm thinking if Zhuanyuantai really appears from Jianghu State, what flag or badge should I use? What do you think of the old one?" "Not very good." "The old badge? The one from the Tianlan family? That's more representative of the Li family, isn't it?" Li Baidian shook his head disapprovingly. "Then we have to design a new one." Lin Yuxian nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I happen to know a designer. That figure, oh, that professional level. Tut, let's talk about it another day." Li Baidian laughed. "I don't believe in professional level. They don't know swords or what Zhuanyuantai is. I want to design it myself." Lin Yuxian said. "With your sense of beauty that has been eaten by a dog?" Li Baidian looked contemptuous. "Get out." Lin Yuxian laughed and scolded. "Hey, you still don't admit it? What's the name of that girl? Jinghuan? She has been chasing you, right? Aren't you attracted to such a beautiful girl? If you are the heir of the Lin clan I can understand, but you are not now. Branch, do you understand? He's poor, but he has a good family background, looks, a good figure, a good education, a good talent, and you're poor, but you have a good family background, you have a good appearance, you have a good figure, you have a good figure, you have a good education, you have a good talent. Screw you." Lin Yuxian sat aside with a disgusted look. Li Baiqian's face became serious. "You really don't want to think about it? Wu Qinghuan is currently the most promising person to become one of us. She can break through the thunder-shocking realm at any time, and she is 2 years younger than you. You know what that means." Lin Yuxian did not speak but shook his head silently. Li Baidian sighed and said softly, "So I'm right. Your sense of beauty is really eaten by a dog." Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and did not speak. He waved his hand and directly dispersed the great void sword intent in front of him. The great void sword intent condensed again after dispersing. Li Baidian came over with a smile. "I say, what kind of girl do you like? I'll introduce you to one." "You can't." Lin Yuxian shook his head and said lightly. He had never felt that he liked anyone. But every time he mentioned the words such as his future partner, girlfriend, or wife, he would always think of a pair of firm and crystal eyes. That was in Huading 2 years ago. Before the maneuver of the 2 academies, when he and Li Tianlan seriously injured Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun, the slim figure stood in front of Gu Xingyun without hesitation. Her eyes. He could not forget it. Lin Yuxian lowered his head and was silent for a long time before he murmured, "So beautiful." Oh. Li Baidian was a little confused. If Tianlan didn't replace Kunlun City, Beihai would still be the same, Emperor Dong's palace would be in the south, and Mai Zhuanyuantai would replace Kunlun City. What kind of scene would Jianghu State be at that time? Lin Yuxian suddenly asked. Li Baidian was stunned for a long time before he became serious. He said solemnly, "The best scene." Unfortunately, no one thought of it or deliberately ignored it. Lin Yuxian said lightly, "But it doesn't matter. When we get through this, maybe we should talk about it." Li Baidian thought of the scene that Lin Yuxian said and was a little lost in thought for a moment. It was rare that he did not speak. The plane passed through the night and kept moving forward. On the way, the plane was flying. In the deep night, the luxury plane was about to arrive at an airport in the northwest of Jianghu State. His Majesty sat in the modified comfortable cabin and looked at the dark night outside the window. Suddenly he said thoughtfully, "How much do you think Qin Weibai weighs in Li Tianlan's heart?" Moraid was stunned and did not speak. He did not understand love. The relationship between men and women always stayed at the most primitive stage. He had no wife and daughter, and he had never considered these. He thought that the answer he gave would not be correct. Maybe, it's more important than everything. Jiang Guochu was silent for a long time before he said softly, "More important than everything." His Majesty muttered these words to himself. He was a little lost in thought and no one knew what he was thinking of. Why is it more important than everything? His Majesty suddenly asked. I can see the ambition in Li Tianlan's eyes. The country and the world he wants are all in it. Will a woman really be more important than everything in his heart? Moraid's face was a little strange. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He thought, how could you not know Li Tianlan? His Majesty glanced at him and did not explain anything. He really did not know Li Tianlan. In particular, he did not understand Qin Weibai's position in Li Tianlan's heart. Because if I were Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai's position in my heart would be more important than everything. Jiang Guochu said seriously. More important than the Jiang family of South America? His Majesty smiled faintly. But Jiang Guochu's answer was without hesitation. Yes, more important than the Jiang family of South America. His Majesty fell silent. She's worth it, Jiang Guochu said again. Ha! His Majesty sighed and did not speak. Your Majesty's question is very strange. Moraid suddenly said. Because I'm hesitating. His Majesty turned to look at the dark sky outside the window. I have a piece of news. If Qin Weibai is really more important than everything in Li Tianlan's heart, this news is enough to make Li Tianlan completely crazy. But I can't predict how crazy he will be. Maybe he will completely destroy the balance of the dark world today. So I've been thinking about whether to release the news or not. So your Majesty hasn't decided whether to do this or not? Jiang Guochu asked. It's too intense. I don't like it. I prefer to do it step by step. His Majesty shook his head. But if there's no other way, it's not impossible to consider doing this. The plane dived and landed slowly. So we're here now. Go to a place with me. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and smiled softly. If this trip goes well and we can kill Li Tianlan with the help of the general trend of the dark world, that's the best. If not, he shook his head and laughed strangely again. That news hee ha ha. Chapter 851. Lin Fengting was easy to find. Being in Beihai province and not deliberately hiding his whereabouts, with the strength of Mount Dibing, it was almost a matter of minutes to find a person in the whole province. He was fishing in Autumn Mountain. Autumn Mountain was not a tourist attraction in Beihai. The mountain was small and not high. There were not many things worth seeing. The only commendable thing was that there was a small reservoir on the mountain, which was not open to the public on weekdays. The water used to irrigate the flowers and plants on Mount Dibing basically came from there. Qiu Shan was the neighbor of Mount Dibing. It was more like a guard silently guarding Mount Dibing. Lin Fengting's tour was really comprehensive. From autumn to winter. He visited all the places worth visiting in Beihai. After going around, he finally returned to the vicinity of Mount Dibing. He liked Qiu Shan very much. He vaguely remembered the place where he fished for the first time when he was young. It was this small reservoir. He was still a child then. Beside him were Wang Tianzong and Li Kuangtu. In front of him were his father, Uncle Li and Uncle Wang. 3 men capable of overturning the entire dark world were betting on whose fishing skills were better. 3 children are fighting. The winner could fish with the 3 adults. The loser was responsible for roasting the fish. At that time it was Wang Tianzong who roasted fish most of the time, and Li Kuangtu always won. Lin Fengting would steal the fish that Li Kuangtu caught and put it in his father's basket when Li Kuangtu was not paying attention. During that season, the scenery of spring was gorgeous, and fresh flowers covered the mountains and plains. The adults, children, fishing rods, and water carried indifference and tranquility that seemed as if it didn't belong to the mortal world. In this season the cold wind was blowing and the snow was flying. The fishing rod was still there and the reservoir was still there, but everything had changed. When Wang Xingxiao walked up to him, Lin Fengting was smiling. He seemed to be recalling something. His eyes were calm, but his smile was a little sad. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes, hesitated for a moment and did not speak. Can you roast fish? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. Yes. Wang Xingxiao laughed and said, Yuatong likes to eat fish very much. I learned how to eat it when I was a child. I haven't cooked for a while, but I think I haven't forgotten how to cook it. Keep it simple. Let me taste your cooking. Lin Fengting handed a small bag to Wang Xingxiao, which contained some chili, cumin and other seasonings. Wang Xingxiao did not refuse and waved his hand casually. Flaming fingers. The snow-soaked branches became dry again. Wang Xingxiao started a fire and slowly peeled off all the fish scales. Lin Fengting watched all this quietly without saying a word. Is there something on your mind, uncle? Wang Xingxiao lowered his head and asked casually. No. Lin Fengting said lightly, I just feel that I'm a little pathetic. Pathetic? Wang Xingxiao raised his eyebrows. Those who can't let go of the past are the most pitiful. Lin Fengting said indifferently, I know this, but I can't let it go. Isn't that even sadder? Wang Xingxiao smiled bitterly and said nothing. I was once friends with your father and Li Kuangtu, the best of friends. Lin Fengting said softly, I only have 2 friends in my life and they are them. So when the Li family was destroyed, your father and I were estranged. I didn't want to see him destroy the Li family, and I didn't want to see the Li family destroy him either. I was caught in the middle and wavered. In the end, it was just because I couldn't let it go. Wang Xingxiao grilled the fish carefully, sprinkling seasonings evenly. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. This time I walked through Beihai again and I had a lot of feelings. Now that I'm back here, it's the beginning. That's where it all started. I never understood why my good brothers would suddenly become like this. I also didn't understand why they could just let it go so easily. Only now do I understand. Perhaps it's not letting it go, but there are some things once done, there's no turning back. Lin Fengting laughed. Many years ago, I met Tianzong here for the first time. Today, many years later, I'm back here to say goodbye to Beihai in the past. Maybe the Lin clan should make some changes in the future. Wang Xingxiao's face suddenly became serious. Uncle, do you mean that the Lin clan wants to enter the secular world? It doesn't matter. Lin Fengting said quietly, what's important is that Chen Fangqing is too intense. I approve of what you're doing now. A leader should act like a leader. When you stand in that position, the most important thing is to be able to tolerate others. In this regard, Li Huaqing is much better than Chen Fangqing. I understand their mentality and scruples, but I won't agree. After this incident, I can give them the balance that Jianghu state wants. Wang Xingxiao grilled the fish silently for a long time. The aroma of the barbecue spread on the snowy autumn mountain. Wang Xingxiao handed the first grilled fish to Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting did not take it. He said with a smile, your cooking is worse than your father's. Can my father grill fish too? Wang Xingxiao was a little surprised. My mother used to cook it. It was delicious. Ah, I forgot. Lin Fengting was a little absent-minded. He hasn't done this for many years. On Autumn Mountain many years ago, when the 3 children became 4, the adults were still fishing and the children were still fighting. As for the girl who joined them, now that he thought about it carefully, the number of times she won and the number of times she lost seemed to be the same. Lin Fengting smiled and stood up. He did not take the grilled fish from Wang Xingxiao's hand. It smelled delicious, but in his opinion, it had no taste. Let's go, he said. Uncle, please wait. Wang Xingxiao stood up with the fish. Lin Fengting paused and turned back to look at Wang Xingxiao. Uncle, what do you think about the blockade of the desert? Wang Xingxiao asked seriously. This should be your concern. Jianghu state has blocked the desert and intends to trap Tianlan. Their general attack on Beihai is about to begin. It's a place of trouble. It's meaningless for me to stay here. He had never intended to get involved in this matter from the beginning. This was a matter between Jianghu state and Beihai. No matter who won or lost, he only intended to look on coldly. It was impossible for him to intervene in this matter. Because the Lin clan would make some changes in the future. Because of the new balance. He had to give a relatively clear attitude. I won't beg you to stay in Mount Dibing, but I hope you can do me a favor. Wang Xingxiao said. Lin Fengting made a sound, neither too light nor too heavy. I hope you can go to the desert. I don't think it's necessary for the desert prison to be blocked. After all, this is a matter between me, Li Tianlan, and Jianghu state. Beihai is facing not only a war but also a feast. Emperor Dong's palace should not be absent. Wang Xingxiao said blandly. Lin Fengting smiled and was silent for a long time. I need a reason, he said quietly. This reason was not persuaded by Wang Xingxiao. It was a reason for him to avoid the hostility of Jianghu state. Thinking of what he had just said, Wang Xingxiao seemed to understand something and said in a deep voice, Qin Weibai is the best reason. Qin Weibai was, the patriarch of the Lin clan was now blocked in the desert. This was indeed the best reason. Lin Fengting smiled and nodded. Let's go. He slowly turned around and his figure suddenly disappeared in front of Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao watched him leave and didn't speak for a long time. In the slight sound of footsteps, the figure of the enchantress came from the depths of the forest and said respectfully, Patriarch, did he agree? He has no reason to refuse. Wang Xingxiao said softly, whether for the Lin clan or for Emperor Dong's palace, he will go. Asking Lin Fengting to break through the blockade of the desert prison. This was Wang Xingxiao's action. As soon as he made a move, it was almost a real fatal move. Of course, he knew that Jianghu state's general attack on Beihai was about to begin. At this time he didn't intend to waste any time, nor did he want to make unnecessary tests. Now that they had officially fallen out, he would go all out in every move he made. The blockade of the desert prison couldn't stop Lin Fengting. Even if Lin Fengting was seriously injured, he was still worthy of being the top expert in the dark world. As long as he wanted to. No invincible realm expert or murderous weapon could stop him. Beijing. Gaomi City. In the deep night, an ordinary-looking black car slowly stopped in a villa area that looked like it had been around for a long time. His Majesty, who had traveled from Europe to the airport and then went straight from the airport to here, looked at the mostly silent lights in the villa area, narrowed his eyes and smiled. It's probably here. What is this place? Moraid looked at the villa area outside the window and was a little surprised. Who knows? His Majesty's voice was soft. Maybe it's a place that can change this era. Get out of the car. He pushed the door open. Moraid and Jianghu followed behind him, one on the left and one on the right, looking around curiously. A domain that was vaguely similar to starlight spread over and completely enveloped the two of them. The figures of the three of them suddenly disappeared into the night. The three of them walked slowly under the eyes of the security guards at the entrance of the villa area. After searching for a while in the not-so-small villa area, they found a detached villa in the corner that would not attract anyone's attention. Number 17, it's here. His Majesty said softly. Should we knock on the door? Moraid asked. No need. His Majesty shook his head, walked into the courtyard of the villa and waved his hand. Crack. With a slight sound, the entire door of the villa instantly turned into countless powder and scattered in the night sky. The first thing that appeared in Moraid's eyes was a pair of ladies' underwear that looked very pure but seemed to be fished out of the water. Moraid's expression was a little strange. There were scattered clothes everywhere in the villa. From the porch to the living room. Coats, underwear, long skirts, shirts and messy clothes kept spreading. On the stairs, sexy high heels and a pair of men's leather shoes were casually thrown there. His Majesty looked at this scene and seemed a little surprised. He whistled and laughed. Is it so interesting? Moraid scratched his head and followed His Majesty to the master bedroom. Vaguely, an incomparably lazy and sweet voice came from the master bedroom. It was melodious, charming and soul-stirring. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and laughed. Such a professional voice. It's really exciting. Chapter 852. The master bedroom was lit with a hazy pink light. The light was blurry and ambiguous. When the three masters who stood at the top of the dark world walked into the master bedroom, the battle between the man and the woman on the huge, luxurious, soft bed seemed to be about to reach its limit. From their point of view, they could only see the man's majestic back and the woman's messy hair. The man's strength and the woman's softness were perfectly blended together. In the blurry light, the content of this picture was not much, but it was rich enough. They were so devoted. So much so that they didn't notice that there were three uninvited guests in the bedroom. The hurried sound became a little chaotic as the battle became more and more intense. His Majesty clearly heard Moraid swallow his saliva. From this angle, he couldn't see the appearance of the woman kneeling on the bed, but just listening to the voice close at hand was enough to make people's blood boil. His Majesty didn't mind Moraid's performance. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Do you want to taste her too?" No one knew when the clouds had become thin. His Majesty's voice passed through the domain, echoed in the bedroom and rang in everyone's ears. The whole bedroom fell into a dead silence in an instant. At this moment, the bodies of the man and woman on the bed were all stiff. They were really stiff. They maintained their original movements and froze there motionlessly. The atmosphere suddenly became oppressive. Moraid grinned and said, "Yes." His Majesty nodded and said, "Approved." The woman, who had maintained her original posture, finally turned her head a little bit. A small face that could really be said to be as beautiful as a flower and jade appeared in front of them. It should have been a very young and pure face, but at this time, it was flushed, revealing a kind of charm that only belonged to women. Her eyes were big and beautiful, but at this time, her eyes were full of panic and bewilderment. She looked at the three men who suddenly appeared in her bedroom and shook her head hard. Her wavy hair swayed messily. Her voice was obviously trembling, but there was still a trace of sweetness left. You are, it's hard for me to explain who we are. There's no need to explain. It's not important. His Majesty laughed and his voice was very gentle. Is this your man? The man who had been frozen in place suddenly came back to his senses, his body moving backward. The woman immediately snorted in a low voice. Under the ambiguous light, the woman's soft body simply made Moraid's mouth dry up. The bare-chested man quickly glanced at the three of them and found that they were all people he didn't know. He calmed down and then became furious. He said gloomily, "All of you get out of here. I'm in a good mood today. I'll give you 3 seconds, otherwise, she's your woman?" His Majesty suddenly asked. The man glanced at him. He couldn't see His Majesty's face, but his intuition told him that His Majesty wasn't very old. He didn't think too much about it and frowned. What? You're her classmate? Or is it that teacher by who is pursuing him? He reached out and hugged the trembling young woman beside him. He said coldly, Yes, she is my woman. You can get lost now. How self-righteous. His Majesty calmly said, Gu Qianquan will be very sad to know this. The girl's body suddenly trembled, and her flushed face instantly turned deathly pale. The man's face was also not much better than his. His face was livid, and his eyes looked extremely flustered. Ning Yunshui, female, 26 years old, postgraduate student of Northwest University of China. 3 years ago you were valued by Gu Qianquan and deeply loved by him. This villa is a gift from Gu Qianquan. You even gave birth to a son for him. He is now next door, right? His Majesty whispered softly, Gu Feng, code 043 in Kunlun City, an expert of the thunder-shocking realm. In terms of relationship, he is Gu Qianquan's distant cousin and also the bodyguard Gu Qianquan arranged for Ning Yunshui. In addition to you, Gu Qianquan also arranged a female bodyguard, code-named Weed. You spent 2 years developing Weed into your mistress and made her loyal to you. She turned a blind eye to everything here and then began to do something to Ning Yunshui. 2 months ago you spent the night here for the first time. In 2 months you came here 53 times and almost became the hostess here. Am I right? He chuckled softly. I can see that you're addicted to it. What? Is sister-in-law very fun? You, Gu Feng was extremely frightened. He originally thought that the other party was just a student or a young teacher of Northwest University China. He did not expect that the other party had a clear view of everything in the dark world and even checked their information clearly. If this was a trap, how long had the other party monitored them? And how could the other party deliberately pay attention to Gu Qianquan's woman? In 3 years, Gu Qianquan didn't spend the night here as many times as you did. His Majesty's voice was a little emotional. Gu Feng felt that these words were a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered that this was what his sister-in-law had said not long ago. However, at that time, Ning Yunshui's tone was full of ambiguity and provocation, while His Majesty's tone was full of mockery. Who the hell are you? Gu Feng forced himself to calm down and asked in a deep voice. You can call me. Before the word, His Majesty, left his mouth, Gu Feng had suddenly made a move. The expanding lightning condensed in his hand in an instant. Gu Feng suddenly stood up and directly punched His Majesty's face. Perhaps the impact was too great and his brain was a little confused, or it was a dying fight. Out of instinct he chose to kill to keep his mouth shut. Moraid tilted his head. Jianghu yawned. His Majesty was motionless. The domain, which was similar to starlight and mist, gently fluctuated in front of him. The starlight domain touched the lightning in Gu Feng's hand. Without a sound, the lightning disappeared. Gu Feng's eyes widened and his face was filled with horror. His palm reached into the clouds and mist. A huge pulling force pulled his body directly into the clouds and mist. It was not tearing or shattering. It was melting. His body began to melt crazily the moment it touched the clouds and mist. His limbs, body and brain. There seemed to be an unimaginable high temperature hitting his body. There was no blood. His body instantly turned into the most incorporeal steam. Ning Yunshui was obviously stunned. She held the quilt and her body trembled more violently. His Majesty waved his hand casually, as if he had eliminated the last trace of Gu Feng's existence. He looked at Ning Yunshui and said, I don't want to kill you for the time being, but I need your cooperation. Do you understand? Ning Yunshui bit her lips hard. Her big eyes flickered and she trembled and nodded. He's very satisfied with you. His Majesty patted Moraid on the shoulder and looked at the woman. Go take a bath. The woman wrapped herself in the quilt and trotted into the bathroom. She quickly came out. She was not a loyal woman to begin with. In order to live, she easily let go of everything she did not intend to hold on to. She went in quickly and came out even faster. She was still wrapped in the quilt and lowered her head. She looked a little humiliated and shy. She came to Moraid's side and said in a low and soft voice, It's okay. Where are we? His Majesty suddenly asked. Jianghu looked at his watch and said slowly, We just passed Yingzhou and are about to reach the Beijiang area. It's still early. His Majesty nodded and glanced at Moraid. Don't worry. Moraid rubbed his hands. He looked at the woman standing in front of him with her head down, and then at His Majesty. What a shame. His Majesty scolded with a smile, stood up and walked out of the master bedroom. Jianghu followed His Majesty. The two of them went next door together. A little boy of about 2 years old was lying in the cradle next door. He was sleeping soundly. His Majesty looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. The muffled voice next door rang out again. His Majesty reached out and touched the boy's face. He whispered, "What a good bargaining chip. Will Gu Qianchuan compromise?" Jianghu frowned and asked. "It's a matter of life and death. Who knows?" His Majesty said lightly, "He has a physical problem. He played too much when he was young. Although his physical strength is still abundant, his fertility is declining. It's an accident to have sex with Ning Yunshui. This can be said to be his only child, and I will give him a way to live. So, the chance of success is very high." Jianghu asked. "Success?" His Majesty shook his head and laughed. "In fact, I don't worry about whether Gu Qianchuan will compromise or not. In my opinion, it is inevitable. I think that even if he compromise, will our plan succeed under his compromise? What's the variable?" Jianghu asked. The voice next door made him confused. He waved his hand and closed the bedroom door. "Li Tianlong. Lin Fengting." His Majesty said calmly, "They are all variables and ruthlessness. So, slow, still too slow. Emperor Dong's palace is moving too slowly. Our people are also moving too slowly." Jianghu was thoughtful and did not speak. Over Zhongzhou State, the transport plane of Emperor Dong's palace had rushed over the border of Yinzhou and officially entered Beijiang province. At the same time, Liaodong, Qiushui, Kanglin and other places, batches of elites from various forces began to officially enter Beihai. The hibernation plan turned into an awakening plan. Countless elites of Zhongzhou State lurking in Beihai began to officially move. His Majesty came to the northwest quietly and turned the most powerful bargaining chip at present into a trump card, waiting to be revealed at any time. Zhongyuan Province. In the number 2 private base of the Dongqing clan, Dongqing Wujin, who had been busy for a long time, turned off a switch in front of him with trembling hands. The open space was scorching hot. In front of him was a huge furnace. The temperature was rising. A screen hung in front of Dongqing Wujin. The screen was full of raging fire. A dark and majestic long sword was floating in the fire of the furnace and rotating slowly. It rotated with an indescribable frequency, as if it was clearly expressing some kind of desire. "You are longing for completeness," Dongqing Wujin whispered. "Unfortunately, you don't need me anymore." Shenyuan Feng in the furnace paused and then rotated counterclockwise, as if responding to something. "My task is done." Dongqing Wujin whispered and activated another mechanism. A crack suddenly opened on the top of the huge furnace. In the raging fire, the dark Shenyuan Feng flickered slightly and disappeared from the base in an instant. What completeness? Dongqing Wudi, the executive minister of the army headquarters, who was supposed to keep a close eye on the desert, stood beside his elder brother and waved his hand. A chilling layer of ice appeared beside Dongqing Wujin, relieving him of the scorching heat that was almost beyond the human body's limit. The essence of Shenyuan Feng is a murderous weapon. The murderous weapon comes from a piece of vital metal. It lost its spirituality because it was divided. But this piece of metal is not dead. It can also have emotions and its own will. This is a sword with life. Dongqing Wujin said slowly, "What I have been doing is to make Shenyuan Feng a real whole. I have succeeded, but only based on the number of murderous weapons now. Obviously, the current Shenyuan Feng is not the piece of metal back then. So." Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows. "So it is pursuing real completeness. It is instinct. It is irresistible," Dongqing Wujin said slowly. Chapter 853. The bonfire burned in the mountain forest at night, dispelling the darkness and chill around it. The soft and melodious sound of the guitar rang out unhurriedly. Tents were set up around it, and more than a dozen young men and women surrounded the bonfire, enjoying a midnight snack. All of them looked like students. The combination of men and women was almost perfect. They snuggled up to each other and the scene looked extremely harmonious. At the periphery of the crowd, a handsome young man stood aside, quietly looking at the girl playing the guitar, his eyes warm and calm. The girl played the guitar, smiling gently and brightly. The night wind blew her hair and the light of the bonfire flickered. Her whole body seemed to glow. Senior, I heard that you and Xiaoxue plan to get married after graduation?" A girl with light freckles on her face looked at the scene and asked with some envy. "Your news is outdated." Another young student came over, stopped the freckled girl's shoulder and whispered with a smile, "Senior, You went to see a house with the class monitor a few days ago. It's a mansion of nearly 800 square meters. We don't understand the world of the rich. You still have the cheek to say that. The freckled girl rolled her eyes at her boyfriend. When are you going to take me to see a house? I don't want 800 square meters. Do you have a small house of 80 square meters? The boy smiled and scratched his head. The house price in my hometown is not so high, so I bought a big house. My family means that I'm just living off my parents and there's nothing to be envious of. The handsome and gentle man smiled and shook his head. His eyes noticed a couple walking into the depths of the mountain forest. He frowned and was a little worried. Don't go far. It's not safe in the middle of the night. Don't worry, senior. The girl's face was a little ruddy. She glared at her boyfriend next to her and giggled. With Xiaoxue here, there won't be any danger. The girl playing the guitar smiled and waved her hand, full of confidence. The boy shook his head and did not say anything. The freckled girl stood there and laughed when she saw this scene. Senior, Xiaoxue is a martial arts master. After you get married, I'm afraid you'll be bullied by her for a lifetime. She's willing. The young man laughed softly. The class leader shouldn't have entered our school, right? I've heard that her family is very powerful and she seems to be very talented. She should have gone to Huading or Yuzhou. It's said that there's a special warfare academy there, and it's a mysterious thing. But she gave up the opportunity for her senior. Is that right? The freckled girl was curious. The young man's eyes became more and more gentle. He looked at his beloved girlfriend and did not speak. The guitar stopped playing for a moment. One more song, one more song. The surrounding young students began to cheer and applaud. The girl, whose strength was completely above everyone but was not arrogant at all, smiled shyly and gently. She glanced at her boyfriend, tilted her head and said with a smile, "Let's play another song." The guitar continued to play amidst the applause. The girl's voice was ethereal and sweet. On the banyan tree by the pond, she sang softly, but her sweet voice stopped abruptly in an instant. Everyone looked at her in surprise. The girl named Xiao Shue's face instantly turned extremely pale. Her gentle eyes suddenly became extremely frightened, and her whole expression seemed to be a little distorted. The young man who noticed this scene walked directly to her without thinking. "What's wrong?" "Look, a meteor." The freckled girl suddenly pointed to the sky and cried. Everyone raised their heads. The night sky seemed to brighten for a moment. Through the sparse winter forest, at the end of the sight, a ray of light suddenly crossed the sky. No one knew how far it was. But everyone noticed the ray of light. The bright moon and the bright stars all seemed to dim at the moment when the ray of light appeared. The ray of light seemed to tear the sky apart and kept flashing at an unimaginable speed. The meteor crossed the night sky. The next moment, the ray of light had flown over their heads from the very distant night sky. A colorful line seemed to be vaguely left behind in the night sky. The next second, the ray of light went away in a flash and disappeared directly from everyone's sight. "So beautiful." After an unknown period of time, someone murmured softly. Then his body subconsciously trembled. Everyone suddenly felt so cold. The whole forest and the whole world seemed to be filled with a kind of ghastly coldness. The girl named Xiao Shui, who should have entered the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy a few years ago, collapsed in her boyfriend's arms and had no strength at all. The meteor had passed. But her eyes were still terrified to the extreme and she couldn't say a word. Ordinary people might just feel very cold. But she knew very well what this coldness meant. This was sharpness. Unparalleled sharpness. Yan and Zhao valued martial arts. As a barrier near Yuzhou, Yan and Zhao's martial arts had always played a very important role in Jianghu State. One of the double walls of Sai City, Drifting Cloud, the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Hua Qingfeng, the sect master of the Shadow Sect. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu. The enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. And so on. Many of the roles of the backbone of the special warfare system in Jianghu State were from Yan and Zhao. Yan and Zhao did not have a famous martial arts force in the dark world like Jade Pool and Mount Shu. But in such a large province, there were many martial arts families. The masters of the families were at least experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, and many of them were in the thunder-shocking realm. When these people gathered together, their strength was extremely impressive. The martial arts of Jade Pool and Mount Shu was about cultivation. But the martial arts of Yan and Zhao was about competition. All the qualified martial arts families in Yan and Zhao province would have a competition every once in a while. This was also the famous elite martial arts competition in Yan and Zhao. To be exact, it was held every 3 years. And the time of the competition was at the end of the 2 academies, which was the winter of the year before graduation. The elite martial arts competition would select some of the top winners and send them to the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. There was no threshold for the competition. Regardless of life or death, everyone who knew the news was qualified to participate. The scene was huge, but it was extremely chaotic and time-consuming. But this was the way Yan and Zhao had always selected the top elites. In Shanghai City, the elite martial arts competition had lasted for nearly a day. From day to night, the selection of good and bad had come to an end. The rest was the battle between the elites. On the edge of the huge martial arts arena, the patriarchs of many families sat there with different expressions, waiting for the judges to count the results. In the middle of the patriarchs, an old man looked at his grandson standing in front of him with a smile and whispered, "You did well today. Keep it up." "Yes." The young man nodded calmly. "Junzi is really good. In this generation his strength can be regarded as the top, and he is no worse than his brother." A middle-aged patriarch beside the old man smiled and said, "By the way, Junzi, I heard that your brother is doing well in Emperor Dong's palace? Is he going to break through to the peak of the fire-flaming realm?" He turned to the old man with an imperceptible flattery in his eyes and said with a smile, "Mr. Qi, when your grandson becomes a senior in Emperor Dong's palace, don't forget us ordinary people." "Don't say that. Haha, in terms of martial arts talent, the 2 brothers are really—" The old man's laughter suddenly stopped, and the next moment he suddenly jumped up. His movement was so violent that he staggered and almost fell to the ground. A few seconds later, almost all the patriarchs of the aristocratic families stood up in shock and looked at the sky in the distance. There was a light in the distant night sky. From south to north, the bright and almost dazzling light kept flashing in the sky. One second it was on the southern edge of the city. The next second, it had directly penetrated the sky above the entire city. The sharpness that could tear the sky and the earth passed the martial arts practice field in an instant with awe-inspiring coldness. That was indescribable majesty and arrogance. At this moment, all the patriarchs of the martial arts families in Yan and Zhao froze on the spot and did not dare to move. From south to north, the light almost flew over the sky of Shanghai City in an instant and then disappeared in the distance. The whole martial arts practice field was dead silent. Everyone was immersed in the flash of light. It was not shock. It was real fear. When fear reached the extreme, all the senses would become extremely pure. There were people at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and Mr. Qi was an expert a half-step to the invincible realm. However, everyone only had one thought when facing that ray of light. Their pride and willpower seemed to be completely shattered under the light that could tear the sky and the earth. Everyone only had one feeling. Small. Just like a real non-entity. If the height of that light was lower, the unparalleled sharpness could tear the whole city apart. What is that?" A patriarch struggled to open his mouth, and his hoarse voice shocked even himself. "I don't know," Mr. Qi, who had the highest realm, said. Then he shook his head and said in a deep voice, "The invincible realm." He said the invincible realm. Not the invincible realm. The meteor flew through the sky and went straight into the sea. Shanghai City was left far behind in an instant. The dazzling light kept flashing, splitting the surface of the sea. Amidst the monstrous waves, each flash of light traversed an incomparably long distance. Yan Zhao quickly fell behind. The light was extremely bright and unimaginable. It entered Qin Island with extreme brilliance. The glorious night view of Qin Island passed in an instant. The more dazzling light flew over Dongshan province. Flashing and trembling. A perfectly straight afterimage appeared in the sky. The light in front was more and more dazzling. The target of the flowing light was clear and direct. It flew over the mountains, the wilderness, the plains, the city and the sea, and went straight into the hinterland of Dongshan. Far in the distance, a bright light lit up. At the extreme speed, the faint light in the distance suddenly became bright. It wasn't a big city. Under the blurred lights, the whole city looked so leisurely that it was almost unorganized. This inland city was called Qingzhou. The flowing light flashed and suddenly became extremely dazzling. It was so small but so dazzling as if it had the supreme glory. In the next second, almost everyone in the city of Qingzhou saw this ray of light. The light crossed the sky with thousands of meters of light, and directly covered the whole city in the blink of an eye. Falling stars and falling moons. It was extremely dazzling. It disappeared in an instant. There had never been such a majestic and dazzling light in the world. The brilliant sword light was unparalleled in the world. Chapter 854. The whole Qingzhou city was in an uproar. The light was so bright and gorgeous that it covered the stars and illuminated the night sky. The bright lights and neon lights were completely dimmed. It flew across the sky and suddenly seemed to be the only color in the world. Then it disappeared over Qingzhou city. Or rather, it fell. Everyone was extremely curious about what it was and where it came from, and why it disappeared over Qingzhou. The process was extremely short. But someone happened to take a photo. In the vast night sky, the colorful light appeared in the photo, and it seemed to amaze the whole world. As a senior astronomy enthusiast, He Yishui could be said to be one of the first people to discover the light. She saw the light through the telescope she bought with a lot of money. It was so clear and yet so blurry. The professional telescope barely captured the constantly flashing picture of the light. She couldn't see what was in the light, but she could appreciate its posture more clearly than most people. It was as if it was gliding through the night sky with grace and speed. Every time the light flickered, it would cross thousands of meters of the night sky, leaving an unimaginable trail of light in the air. It was moving forward in a straight line, so focused and so persistent. The light flashed and disappeared in an instant. Yishui was a little upset, and then she became a little excited. She picked up her mobile phone, opened the address book and sent a voice message to her best friend. Mudong, did you see that? That meteor is so beautiful. It should be a very rare meteorite. I have a video here. If you didn't see it, I'll send you a copy. Li Mutong on the other end of the phone did not respond. Because the meteor was standing in front of her at this time. Yishui might be one of the first people to discover the meteor. But she was definitely not the first person to feel the meteor. Wang Yuetong was. Or in other words, a few thunder-shocking realm experts in Qingzhou were the first people to feel the meteor. It was not a meteor. It was sword light. Pure sword light. The sword light was so condensed, pure and perfect. It flew over Qingzhou city. Li Mudong felt the terrible oppression and coldness at the first time. In front of this sharp edge that seemed to be able to easily tear everything apart, she did not have any thoughts of resisting. She had never been to Eastern Europe, nor had she seen the real heavenly sun of the world. Her perception might not be accurate, but the Howran sword light that flashed across the sky seemed to have surpassed her father's in her memory. Her eyes widened in horror and her face turned pale. The little girl named Tide was sleeping soundly in her arms. She was gently wrapping her fingers around herself. Through the window of the living room, she saw the sword light flying directly toward her house. The windows in the living room were instantly shattered. There was no clear sound. The sturdy glass instantly turned into the finest powder without a sound. The sword light flew into the living room and appeared in front of her. Li Mutong's body tensed up and she subconsciously hugged her daughter tightly in her arms. Her mind was in a mess. She bit her lips and didn't know what to say. She couldn't figure out how the other party had found him. He didn't know who the other party was. He had no idea what the other party was here for. Her eyes trembled slightly. Holding the child in her arms, she finally became determined. There was a black shadow in her sight. The rainbow-colored light was slowly dispersing around him. The black shadow became clearer and clearer. It seemed to be a person, but his entire body was wrapped in a long black trench coat, and the black trench coat was covered with the black trench coat was embroidered with countless complicated and gorgeous golden patterns. A big hood covered his head. Li Mudong could only see the coat. It could be said to be the most gorgeous and majestic coat she had ever seen. But she couldn't see the person in the coat. She bit her lips, holding the child, and looked at him stubbornly. Her eyes gradually calmed down and they were a little gloomy. The black shadow was also silent. His eyes fell on the little girl in her arms and he was motionless. It seemed like he was surprised, stunned, dazed and nothing at all. She couldn't feel any emotion from him. He seemed to be emotionless, quiet, indifferent and steady like the deep sea or the abyss. "Who are you?" Li Mudong asked slowly. Her voice was calm and clear, without a trace of trembling. The black shadow moved and took 2 steps forward. "If you take 1 step forward, I promise you will only see 2 dead bodies." Wang Yuetong said calmly, "I don't know who you are and I don't know what you want to do. But you can't get anything from me and you can't use me to threaten my family and him." She held the daughter in her arms with deep sorrow in her eyes, but she became more and more determined. The black shadow froze on the spot, and he seemed to be at a loss. Li Mudong was stunned. In her sight, the black shadow slowly raised his palm. His movement was very slow. Maybe he was afraid of causing some misunderstanding, so he was very careful. With a slight tearing sound, a finger-sized hole appeared on Li Mutong's leader. A glimmer of light left Li Mutong's leader and stayed on the black shadow's sleeve. The pale silver light kept spinning and jumping in the black shadow's hand. It was extremely eager and excited, and it seemed that it couldn't wait. Li Mutong looked at the pendant she had been wearing for almost 2 years, and her heart suddenly ached. However, her body gradually relaxed. Because of the pendant's reaction. Are you one of his people? She forced a smile, looked at the silver light jumping on the black shadow's sleeve and said softly, "It does belong to him. If he wants to take it back, you can take it." The heart-breaking sword of the 13-story building. 2 years ago he put the heart-breaking sword on her, and it had never left him until now. Li Mutong watched it fly into someone else's hand. She was in a daze and no one knew what she was thinking. The black shadow lowered his head and looked at the heart-breaking sword in his hand. At this moment, Li Mutong could clearly feel his emotions from him. It was hesitation, and longing. The black shadow moved and seemed to look at her, then at the heart-breaking sword and then at her again. After repeating this for nearly 5 minutes, he raised his palm. The delicate heart-breaking sword floated in the air, shining with silver light, beautiful and cold. A subtle but extremely strong light appeared in the black shadow's palm. The light wrapped the heart-breaking sword. The shattered heart, which had been trembling all this while, suddenly stopped. The exquisite little sword suddenly emitted an incomparably sharp aura. As if it had been waking up from a long sleep, the sword energy of the heart-breaking sword was extremely strong in an instant. The black shadow looked at the heart-breaking sword. The heart-breaking sword moved slowly and carefully, stopping in front of Wang Yuetong. "What do you mean?" Li Mutong looked at him in surprise. "It belongs to him. I don't need it. You can take it away." The black shadow was silent and motionless, just looking at her quietly. The black clothes wrapped him so tightly that Li Mutong couldn't hear his voice or see his expression. She only saw him raise his sleeve and point at the child in her arms. "Tide is my daughter." Wang Yuetong suddenly screamed and held the child tightly. It seemed that because she was holding the child too hard, Tide's little body trembled slightly, and she struggled to cry. The black shadow was obviously a little flustered. He raised both sleeves and waved them randomly. A stream of air appeared in the living room. The gentle and steady stream wrapped the little girl. Li Mutong stretched out her palm. Tide, who was in distress, came directly to the black shadow. "Oh." Li Mutong seemed to have completely broken down in an instant. "Give my child back to me." Her voice was a little desperate, with a hint of pleading. The black shadow looked down at Tide. The big one and the little one looked at each other. From this angle, the little girl seemed to be able to see his face. No one knew what the little girl saw. Tide's crying gradually disappeared, and then she giggled very happily. The black shadow bent down and looked at Tide floating in the air. He hesitated and raised a finger. Li Mutong looked at this scene nervously. His finger slowly moved down and finally fell on the little girl's eyebrows. A perfect and dreamy light suddenly bloomed from his finger. The light enveloped the whole living room. Wang Yuetong stood up subconsciously, trying in vain to stop something. Tide's laughter was still ringing in her ears. In the colorful light, it looked extremely dreamy. The light expanded and then faded away quickly. Tide's laughter didn't stop and he sounded extremely happy. Li Mutong's palm slightly sank. The little girl returned to her arms and a little hand grabbed her neckline. Li Mutong was relieved and held the little girl tightly. The light disappeared completely. The black shadow was still standing there. His aura had obviously dropped by a notch. Li Mutong was stunned and looked down at her daughter in her arms. There was a tiny but extremely beautiful mark left between the little girl's eyebrows. It was like an almost imperceptible diamond-shaped crystal, shining with colorful light in the light. Her fingers gently touched the crystal and she felt warmth. But inside the crystal, she clearly sensed a sharpness that could destroy everything. If this was an amulet, it could be said that this amulet was unique in the whole dark world. Wang Yuetong looked at the black shadow in a daze. She couldn't refuse such a gift because from this moment on, her daughter had a power that no one could hurt her. Her rosy lips moved and she whispered, "Thank you." The black shadow, whose breath had obviously dropped, stood there blankly. He didn't look tired and he just quietly looked at Tide in Li Mutong's arms. "Don't tell him." Li Mutong whispered, "I'm begging you. Don't tell him." The little girl in Wang Yuetong's arms giggled and reached out her little hand toward the black shadow, as if she wanted to grab him. The black shadow took a few steps back. Li Mutong was stunned and stood up subconsciously. In her sight, the black shadow backed out of the broken window, and suddenly fell from the 5th floor. That gorgeous black windbreaker spread out in the air to its heart's content. The 4th floor, the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor. Flashing. A stream of dazzling flowing light suddenly lit up the entire Qingzhou. The flowing light flew high in the sky and appeared in the sky that Li Mudong could see. Then it flashed again and instantly left the Qingzhou city. All the way to the north. Chapter 855. Jianghu state was moving. Beihai was also moving. The real chaos began when North Sea wiped out all foreign forces. Wang Xingxiao's statement that those who entered the border of Beihai would die fully explained what it meant to say that attack was the best defense. The fall of the four major generals was just the beginning. The ubiquitous undercurrents had quietly swept across the entire North Sea. Blood, battles, conspiracies, and betrayals began to play out sporadically in every corner of the North Sea. Wang Xiaoyao had let go of his scruples and began to fight with all his strength. The strength he had accumulated for many years began to be exposed little by little. Not only Mount Dibing but also the 7 major sword-holding families could clearly feel that there would be big and small problems in a certain link of his orders. In the eyes of ordinary people, Beihai was still calm. But those who stood at the top could clearly see the turmoil and chaos. Orders to recall experts from all over the world were sent out one after another. More and more experts returned to the North Sea. There were teams, individuals, and all sorts of talents. Little by little, the foundation of North Sea was being exposed. It was not the madness of a dying struggle. All the actions were orderly. Beihai was getting more and more chaotic, but the actions on Mount Dibing were clear and definite from the beginning, with a kind of beauty of order. As the only and last disciple of Xie Huangfu Qiushui, the daughter of this generation of the Huangfu family, was also officially summoned back to the North Sea. This girl, who once had the courage to fight with Li Tianlan at the same realm, had now become an influential figure in the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao were equally young. But the world had changed and they were already standing on the highest stage facing countless sabers and swords, and hidden thunder above the 9th heaven. They were very young but they were already somewhat out of touch with true youth. When the influential figures of the past reached the pinnacle, there would always be younger people to replace their positions. Huangfu Qiushui was one of the best. At the age of 20 she was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. In both academies of Jianghu state she could be said to be a veritable goddess-like figure. Huangfu Qiushui did not return to Beihai alone. Instead she brought along a small team she had set up in the Sky Academy. The team was called Kuanglan. The word Lan had caused a huge controversy in the Huangfu family, but Huangfu Qiushui had also displayed an extremely tough attitude. She didn't care what others said and directly decided on the name. Currently there were only 7 people in the Wild Tide squad. 5 Fire-Flaming Realm experts. 2 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts. The one with the highest realm had already stabilized the realm of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. But the number 1 expert of the Wild Tide squad had always been the captain, Huangfu Qiushui, who had not yet entered the Thunder-Shocking Realm. The whole team came to Beihai. If there were no accidents, the Violent Squad would also become part of the Beihai Corps after graduation. All the internal members would change their household registration and become a member of Beihai. They would be completely absorbed by the Beihai Corps. Huangfu Qiushui would also move up in the Beihai Corps. In the future, if she wasn't the patriarch of the Huangfu family, she would definitely become a Corps senior who controlled all the forces of the Huangfu family. The Violent Squad would become the core force of the Huangfu family and have nothing to do with Jianghu state from then on. From a certain point of view, Qin Fangqing was right to think that Beihai was a cancer of Jianghu state. Because over the years, Beihai had indeed taken a lot of things from Jianghu state, including technology, talents, and resources. Although they had also given Jianghu state generous returns, it had been going on for too long. Whether it was fair or not depended on one's mentality. A situation similar to the Violent Tide squad would happen to the graduates of each session of the 2 academies. Before the appearance of Emperor Dong's palace, Beihai had always been a popular choice for many elites. Jianghu state carefully cultivated elites, and a large number of people would enter Beihai every session. Their popularity was even higher than that of Kunlun City. Among such a team, Huangfu Qiushui's Violent Tide squad could be said to be the most outstanding one. It was also the most blatant one. They returned to Mount Dibing as soon as they received the order. Then they returned to Qiushui City from Mount Dibing. The task of the Kanglan squad was very simple. They helped the Huangfu family to stabilize the order of Qiushui City in the worst case. The worst case, Huangfu Qiushui thought for a whole day. She only thought of 2 words. The worst. Wang Xingxiao told her the worst. She was the disciple of Summer Solstice. She could be said to be Wang Xingxiao's junior sister. It might not be appropriate to call her junior sister, but Wang Xingxiao, who had spent most of her time in Mount Dibing, undoubtedly regarded her as his sister. Therefore Wang Xingxiao explained the conversation between them very thoroughly. The word worst also brought her endless pressure. In her memory, even throughout the history of Beihai, the so-called worst case was rare, and it could even be said that it had never happened before. What had Zhongzhou State thought about? How fierce would the so-called game be this time? She returned to Qiushui City and her family and thought for nearly a day and a night. The night was about to pass. Huangfu Qiushui, who hadn't slept all night, was a little sleepy, but her mind was still confused. She shook her head hard, got up, put on her clothes and walked out of the door. Outside the door was an extremely secluded little courtyard. The two thunder-shocking realm experts of the Violent Tide squad were guarding the door, seemingly acting as bodyguards. Seeing Huangfu Qiushui come out, the older man with the highest realm turned around reflexively and said, "Captain, go and have a rest." Huangfu Qiushui said quietly. Her voice was a little distant, with a sense of distance. "Where do you want to go, Captain? Let me accompany you?" The man scratched his head and laughed. His code name, Guardian, was given by himself, and he changed it the moment he saw Huangfu Qiushui. He had never concealed his crazy infatuation and pursuit of Huangfu Qiushui, but Huangfu Qiushui always kept a distance from him. Relatively speaking, her attitude toward the other team members was closer than that of Guardian. "I'm going to the family ancestral hall," Huangfu Qiushui said blandly. When she said the ancestral hall, she seemed to think of something. Her light and almost holy face blushed slightly, and she subconsciously raised one hand to touch her face. Guardian's eyes were hot and almost obsessed. He also wanted to touch her face. His greatest wish was even to be able to touch Huangfu Qiushui's face. But as soon as his fingers moved, he withdrew them awkwardly. Huangfu Qiushui noticed his eyes, frowned slightly and said in a cold voice, "Get out of the way." Guardian took a step back in embarrassment. Huangfu Qiushui walked past him, and her footsteps were a little hurried. The family ancestral hall was the only place she could think of that could calm her heart. Guardian took a deep breath, looked at Huangfu Qiushui's back, and his eyes were a little sad. "You're a toad trying to eat swan meat. You're lucky to live until now and you still want to hit on the captain here? I'm afraid you haven't woken up yet." Another expert of the thunder-shocking realm in the Wild Billow squad laughed. "What do you mean hit on the captain? I like her and that's my right." "You should have forgotten the captain's sword," the thunder-shocking realm member said with a faint smile. His code name was Zhang Lei. Different from Guardian, he joined the Wild Billow squad to join the Wang family of Beihai. His biggest dream was to make a name for himself in the Beihai Corps. Guardian narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "The captain is really strong. But I'm close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm." He was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm at the age of less than 30. In any case, he could be regarded as a genius. This was also the reason why he dared to express his love for Huangfu Qiushui. At his age and today's achievements, no one dared to say that he had no hope of reaching the half-step invincible realm or even the invincible realm in the future. "Idiot." Zhang Lei curled his lips. "I'm talking about the captain's sword, not her strength. Don't you know the characteristics of the Wang family of Beihai's martial arts? Today's patriarch is very strong, but he's strong in the wind and thunder veins. Beihai's martial arts focus on momentum and the foundation. How much strength can a normal expert of the fire-flaming realm exert? Unless they're in an explosive state, which is the characteristic of Beihai's martial arts. If time goes back, even His Majesty Wang Tianzong would not be her opponent at the captain's age. Pure Beihai's martial arts should still be stabilizing the foundation at the captain's age." "What are you trying to say?" Guardian frowned. "Haven't you heard that rumor?" Zhang Lei's smile was a little weird. He was from Beihai. Although he didn't belong to a sword-holding family, his family was considered to be above average in Qiushui City, so he knew the truth of some rumors. The foundation of the captain's martial arts is in Beihai, but today's kendo is approaching that, which is different from Beihai's martial arts. Guardian's face changed slightly, and then he forced a sneer. "Hearsay. Don't forget my background." Zhang Lei's tone was a little superior. He glanced at his companion and said playfully, "I heard that when that person swept Beihai 2 years ago, his first battle was with Qiushui. The first sword left by that person was left in the ancestral hall of the Huangfu family. Captain is going to the ancestral hall now. What do you think she's going to do? When that person swept through the North Sea, Captain followed him for a period of time. I heard that His Highness was very optimistic about Captain. Who knows if it was because of her talent or something else. Diske, that's why I said that you're lucky to be alive until now." Guardian clenched his teeth. His face was livid and a little pale. With a slight sound, Huangfu Qiushui pushed open the door of the ancestral hall. The faint but awe-inspiring sword energy came to her face. It was a little cold, but Huangfu Qiushui was very familiar with it. There might be thousands of rumors, but there was always one that was right. That was, Huangfu Qiushui had indeed gradually moved in another direction from Beihai's martial arts. In 2 years her physical fitness was unlikely to support her to enter the thunder-shocking realm, so she spent most of her time simulating, imitating, and then practicing continuously. Many people felt that her sword energy and fighting style were becoming more and more like Li Tianlan's. This sentence was right but not completely right. Most of the time, she imitated the sword intent of Qingguang's sword. Qingguang's sword was left in the ancestral hall by Li Tianlan. It was a part of the 13-story building with Li Tianlan's sword energy on it. The perfect integration of the two was as profound as the sky and the sea for Huangfu Qiushui. Her increasingly fierce sword energy was an imitation of the sword energy on Qingguang's sword. She occasionally thought of the man who could carelessly touch her face with his feet. Thinking of his sword light and his rudeness when he conquered Sister Yuetong in front of her for the last time, she had mixed feelings. But here she could indeed calm down in the fastest time. She took a step forward and closed the door of the ancestral hall. Buzz. In the subtle sound, the quiet Qingguang sword trembled slightly, looking a little happy. Huangfu Qiushui was a little curious and took a step forward subconsciously. A black shadow suddenly appeared in her line of sight. Huangfu Qiushui was startled. Her whole body suddenly tensed up, surrounded by sword energy as if facing a formidable enemy. The black shadow stood in front of Qingguang's sword with his back to her. The gorgeous and mysterious black windbreaker looked extremely majestic. His palms seemed to be touching the hilt of Qingguang's sword. Huangfu Qiushui didn't know when the other party came in. She didn't even know why she didn't notice the other party just now. The other party had his back to her and was quiet. Huangfu Qiushui subconsciously shifted her gaze. The black shadow was still there, but it disappeared in her perception in an instant. It was extremely illusory. It was as if it really was a phantom. Huangfu Qiushui naturally knew what it meant. It meant that the other party was at least an unimaginable master for her. In people's impression in the entire dark world, there seemed to be only one person who could do this. Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He was more real than heaven and earth, but more illusory than the air. You are. Huangfu Qiushui gritted her teeth and asked slowly. The black shadow moved and slowly turned around. He raised his head. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly opened her eyes, which were full of spiritual energy. Her eyes were a little nervous, but there was also a kind of joy and surprise that she might not even be aware of. Under the black hood, in the slightly swaying candlelight in the ancestral hall, there was an extremely young and clean face. His appearance was a little blurred in the dim light, but it could still be seen that he was not handsome. That clean face could only be said to be delicate. The most eye-catching thing was his temperament. That was an indescribable temperament. At this moment, there were only 4 words in Huangfu Qiushui's mind. Peerless beauty. It turned out that a man could also be described as peerless beauty. He was like the sun, dazzling. In the dark ancestral hall, his whole body seemed to be shining, perfect like a dream. Huangfu Qiushui looked at him in a daze, and suddenly remembered the scene when she squatted in front of him and wiped his feet for him 2 years ago. She remembered that the other party rubbed her face with his feet. It was a little moist, a little warm, and a very humiliating action, but she didn't feel humiliated at all. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were a little intoxicated, then turned into astonishment, slowly into surprise, and finally became unfamiliar. That face was still so clear. But she seemed to be sure of something. You are not Li Tianlan," she whispered. The face in her sight was indeed Li Tianlan. His figure and appearance were exactly the same. But what was different was that he was too eye-catching. In her impression, Li Tianlan was very calm, but in his calmness, there was a strong sense of confidence and desire or ambition. And the Li Tianlan in front of her, he was also very calm. But his calmness was extremely indifferent, with a kind of real indifference and carelessness. Huangfu Qiushui could feel the arrogance behind this calmness. Extreme arrogance. It was a kind of look that looked at everyone as an ant. Peaceful, indifferent, dignified, superior, insufferably arrogant, and supercilious. It was an indescribable overbearing, restrained to the extreme, but it made people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. In her sight, Li Tianlan shook his head and then nodded. He could understand her words. His current appearance might not be the current Li Tianlan, but it was Dong Huang in the deepest part of his memory. Dong Huang at his peak. Huang Fuqiushui glanced at him blankly, and then subconsciously looked at the sky light beside him. The sky light seemed to have completely dimmed. The sword energy belonging to Li Tianlan was still there. But the sword energy belonging to the 13th floor became extremely weak. Huang Fuqiushui was slightly shocked and suddenly turned her head. What did you do to him? It was completely silent. Huang Fuqiushui's hair suddenly stood on end. There was nothing in her sight. Except for the skylight and candlelight. There was only a row of spirit tablets of the Qiushui family. And Li Tianlan, whom she had just seen, had long disappeared. Huang Fuqiushui suddenly rushed out of the ancestral hall. At the same time she rushed out of the ancestral hall. The Black Shadow had left Qiushui City and came to the front of the old site of the Qin clan in Port Tongtian. There was also a sword here. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.